Chapter 1277. On the threshold where moonlight and light blended, the notebook turned the last page. The 16-year-old boy sat leaning against the door, looking up at the starlight in the night sky, lost in thought. The wooden sword and notebook lay beside him, making a soft sound when the wind blew. His master said it was a story. An extremely glorious era. It had been 4 years since he made the choice that night. He opened these notes for the first time tonight, not to accept the story. Instead, he wanted to finish the story in his memory. From a very young age, Li Dongqing had the most basic thinking and memory. He remembered that his mother made him feel at ease and warm. He remembered that she gently stroked the fingers in front of his eyes. He remembered what she looked like. He remembered that she wore a red dress and put on exquisite makeup for him. He remembered that she was in a trance when she handed him and his sister over to his master. He remembered the helplessness when his sister left all the best food she could find for him in the garbage dump. He remembered the complicated look in his master's eyes when he looked at him. He remembered his godfather's doting and his serious injuries and exhaustion every time he came back. He remembered that someone had talked about Lin and Jianghu State, Dongqing clan and Dongwang. He also remembered the stories his mother told him when he was born. Those stories became dreams as he grew up. In the dream, he was illusory. He looked at his father, who was a little vague when he was young, and his mother, who was very clear. He felt their sadness, joy, and resentment. In the dream, they met and died. Countless emotions surged in the depths of his heart since he was a child. He didn't know what to say, so most of the time, he was silent. Under the moonlight, with each page of the notebook turned, the image of his parents in his memory seemed to become more and more three-dimensional and clear. It was like a young couple with peerless beauty was standing on his left and right side. The joys and sorrows of separation and reunion came to him. Li Dongqing reached out and gently touched the wooden sword beside him, feeling the cool touch from the sword, and he became quieter and quieter. Light footsteps could be heard. Under the moonlight, Lin Fengting, whose hair was all white and wore a loose tang suit, slowly walked over, carrying a jar of good Huadiao wine in his hand. Li Dongqing looked up at him and whispered, "Master, I know you're in a bad mood. Do you want to drink?" Lin Fengting lifted the wine jar in his hand. "Shall we ask the kitchen to make a few dishes to go with the wine?" Li Dongqing glanced at the wine pot and shook his head. Tea. In the hall, the two maids responsible for taking care of Li Dongqing looked at each other and turned to make tea. Lin Fengting did not care about anything and directly sat down beside Li Dongqing. There was a wooden sword between them. The cold moonlight shone on the courtyard garden, and the sky was hazy and blurry. The tea was served. Li Dongqing took the teacup and took a sip. The tea was strong and bitter. Lin Fengting glanced at him. "Did you read the notes?" "Yes." "Is there nothing you want to say to me?" "Yes." "Have you ever regretted it?" "I mean, the choice back then. A few years ago, if you had chosen that jade pendant, you would be the young patriarch of the Lin clan now. You wouldn't have to consider anything, just like me. You could do whatever you want, and you wouldn't have to shoulder anything. Isn't that good? And now, a story, let you carry a lot of things. Is it worth it?" "Yes." "Huh, like you. As a son, you have to do something for your parents, right?" "Yes." "Want to avenge them?" "Yes." "Are you confident?" "Yes." In the indescribable depression, Lin Fengting took a deep look at his disciple. He took the wine jar, took 2 cups, and filled them with wine. Li Dongqing did not move, but gently touched the wooden sword in his hand. "The divine list has a new ranking." Lin Fengting picked up the wine glass and whispered, "Emperor Huawu has reached the top of the divine list and ranks first." He took a sip of wine and laughed at himself. It's true that the Li family is good at making arrangements. The path of Emperor Huawu is similar to that of the ancestors of our Lin clan. When Li Guangtu pulled out his dragon vein from him, Senior Li should have nodded. Huawu had half of the vitality of the dragon vein of Jianghu State and entered the peak of the invincible realm. From then on, they should have had a plan. After your father died, the dragon veins attracted each other, and Emperor Huawu filled up his own dragon vein. These years, he has completely recovered from the injury in his body, successfully broke through the peak of the invincible realm, and entered a new realm. At present, his realm is not as good as that of your father and Wang Tianzong. But now, he is the only one in this realm, so in this era, he can almost be called the chosen one. Today's Li family is really invincible in the world. He drank up the glass of wine. Lin Fengting sighed softly, feeling a little emotional. Li Dongqing slowly reached out, picked up the teacup, and took another sip of tea. After a long while, he nodded. Yes. The soft light of the crystal chandelier filled every corner of the hall of the ancient castle. 2 rows of medieval-style armors were neatly arranged in the hall. The huge screen was playing the news of East Island's Emperor Huawu's official visit to Atalos. In front of the tea table, which was carved with complex patterns and could be called a work of art, a middle-aged man in his 40s, who was full of vigor, picked up the glass and said softly, "Brother, I'd like to propose a toast to you." Lin Yuxian picked up the glass, clinked it with him, and drank up the wine in the glass. The Lin clan has developed well in recent years. The middle-aged man, who had an ordinary appearance but an extraordinary aura, smiled and said, "Brother, your branch in particular has developed a little frighteningly in the past few years. You're blossoming everywhere. You can even say that you're a superpower now." Lin Yuxian held the glass and looked at him with a faint smile. "Why, do you want it?" "Brother, what are you talking about?" The middle-aged man shook his head. "I'm greedy, but I won't rob the elders of the Lin clan. What I want to say is that Big Brother and I are a family, and we don't have to be separated. When we develop together, there's no need to worry about anything. Big Brother, you're doing well in Europe and Africa, but I haven't seen your flag in my territory. If you are interested, how about I invite you to develop in East Island of Jianghu State? The subcontinent is big, but I think I'm important enough. To be honest, there are not many people who don't respect me. Brother, if you come in, no one dares to say anything." Lin Yuxian took a deep breath and said blandly, "The subcontinent is really big, but the market has long been saturated. How can I get involved?" "If you want to, of course, there is." The middle-aged man said seriously, "If the Lin clan's industry wants to come in, I will naturally fully support it. If you want to get involved in many fields in Jianghu State, the parliament will be more than happy. Even if you think it's troublesome, it doesn't matter. I have a good relationship with the royal family of Semitic, so you can get in directly. It doesn't matter even if you have to take my share. Our families have been friends for so many years. It's too boring to care about interests." Lin Yuxian glanced at him and seemed to be a little surprised. The Semitic people had an extraordinary position in the world because they controlled the energy, oil. Semitic also had the largest oil reserves in the world. If Lin Yuxian got involved, the benefits he would get would make even the super forces crazy with jealousy. At present, most of the benefits in this area were controlled by the good brother in front of him. Lin Yuxian suddenly laughed. "You know better than me that the things in my hands don't belong to the Lin clan. I'm not even a branch of the Lin clan now. If you want to cooperate, you can talk to the Lin clan. But it doesn't feel right to talk to me, a person who has no status in the Lin clan. Everything in my hands has nothing to do with the Lin clan. As for myself..." He shook his head. "The oil in the subcontinent is too rich. I'm afraid I'll have indigestion." The middle-aged man was silent for a long time. When it was quiet, his silence showed that he was in a somewhat sluggish state. His entire person carried an indescribable feeling of emptiness. Lin Yuxian remained calm, drinking and eating in silence. "I don't regard you as an outsider. Why do you keep me 1,000 miles away? Do you know how much information about you have been squeezed out from me over the years? You and I have had several conflicts, but I have suppressed them and tolerated you everywhere. Because I have always felt that you and I are a real family. Uncle Lin is also here. If I reach out everywhere, it means that I'm not sensible, impolite, and disrespectful to the elders. I don't regard you and the Lin clan as outsiders. You treat me like this, which makes me feel a little wronged. Lin Yuxian shook his head and said flatly, I have nothing to do with the Lin clan. In life, many things can be changed, and many relationships can be changed. But how can bloodline be changed? You are the heir of the Lin clan. In my eyes, everything you have naturally belongs to the Lin clan. The middle-aged man looked at Lin Yuxian with burning eyes. Bloodline. This has always been the obsession of your family. I can't agree with it. There was a little ridicule in Lin Yuxian's tone. The middle-aged man drank a glass of wine and said in a low voice, if you are not satisfied with some you can make any other requests. As long as you say it, I will agree to all of them. He thought that Lin Yuxian was advancing by retreating and wanted to increase the price. Lin Yuxian took a deep look at him and suddenly said, why don't you tell me what you want? I want to ask you for a person. The middle-aged man spoke bluntly. Lin Yuxian's pupils shrank suddenly. The silence formed a stalemate. The surrounding atmosphere became dignified and austere invisibly. I thought you wanted two. Lin Yuxian sneered. One is enough. The middle-aged man whispered, cut the weeds and eliminate the roots. If he doesn't die, I can't feel at ease. There is nothing to talk about. Lin Yuxian shook his head. I can't afford what you want. Your Majesty, you don't have to call me brother. I can't afford this title either. The middle-aged man narrowed his eyes, and his voice was still calm with almost full sincerity. Why are you so straightforward, brother? I come here sincerely this time, and... Don't say any more. Lin Yuxian's voice was calm. If you continue, I will see you out. The middle-aged man's voice stopped. The lingering sound of his unfinished words suddenly became incomparably hoarse. Lin Yuxian lowered his head to eat and said calmly, have a safe trip. I won't see you out. Huh, the middle-aged man stood up. The bright yellow dragon robe, the 12 movements of the sun, the moon, and the stars of East Island. As the middle-aged man got up, he appeared in the hall in a complicated and gorgeous costume. Lin Yuxian did not raise his head. I'm kind and sincere. Why are you so heartless, brother? The Li family and the Lin clan have been friends for hundreds of years. You and I are one family. Everything in the past is still vivid in my mind. Brother, do you really have the heart to see us become enemies because of a bastard? His voice was still calm, but a strong sense of majesty and oppression arose spontaneously between the lines. Lin Yuxian slowly raised his head and looked at the man in front of him. He was the current patriarch of the Li family, the leader of the dark world of Jianghu state, the dominator of the purgatory of heaven capital, the first on the world divine list, the celestial emperor of East Island, and the supreme will of the subcontinent. Since his sister-in-law died in Beihai more than a decade ago, there was no one in the dark world who could balance him. With the strength at the peak of the invincible realm, he returned to East Island with the purgatory of heaven capital, which had suffered heavy losses. The subcontinent had been full of turbulence and bloodshed for many years. Gaoshan, Annan, Heng State, the will of the celestial emperor of Huawu wreaked havoc in the subcontinent. Then Jianghu State. Then Beihai, which had not yet recovered. For more than a decade, the dark world of the subcontinent had not been completely unified, but the purgatory of heaven capital and the Li family had suppressed all the resistance. Now they were slowly digesting the fruits of victory. In 10 years, at most 20 years, if everything went well, the Li family and the purgatory of heaven capital would become the only dynasty in the subcontinent. The Wang family of Beihai and the super-wealthy families would die slowly under the soft knife of the purgatory of heaven capital. And they didn't even have the slightest way to resist. The celestial emperor of Huawu, who had established the general situation of the subcontinent not long ago, did not stop. Instead, he took advantage of his ascension to the first on the divine list to officially expand. The European land was their first stop. The celestial emperor of Huawu officially visited Italos. 2 days later, he would officially visit the Holy Land and meet the old man. The Holy Land and the purgatory of heaven capital were deeply cooperating. In today's European land, the Shadow Throne, Rothschild, the wealthy families, and the Dark Knights were all facing a formidable enemy. Similarly, Lin Yuxian was also facing a formidable enemy. The whole dark world was a little uneasy. Because in this era, there was really no one who could stop the Celestial Emperor of Huawu. How good it would have been if you had done this earlier. Lin Yuxian said blandly, "Brother, you are uncomfortable, and so am I. In my eyes, you are the most normal person. I am being sincere." The Celestial Emperor of Huawu shook his head slightly. "In my heart, the Lin clan is really not an outsider, neither is my brother. What I want is that bastard. He is 16 this year, right? I don't want to wait anymore. What do you and the Lin clan want? Just say it. As long as I have it, I can give it to you. But you have to give that bastard to me." "Are you going to kill him?" Lin Yuxian's voice was cold. "Kill my adopted son? Not kill." The Celestial Emperor of Huawu shook his head. "Not just kill. That crazy woman killed my father. After that, I couldn't even find my father's bones. I could only set up a cenotaph. I'll take that bastard back and tear every part of him in front of my father's cenotaph bit by bit. I'll let him die slowly and hope that his screams will be louder at that time. I also hope that the crazy bitch hasn't gone far and can listen to his son's screams. I'll let him know that he and Li Tianlan are completely cut off and have no descendants." Lin Yuxian said word by word, "That's my adopted son. So?" The surrounding temperature continued to drop. The Celestial Emperor of Huawu's voice became gloomy. "Brother, are you going to stop me from killing that bastard?" Lin Yuxian did not speak. The Celestial Emperor of Huawu continued, "Can you stop me? After I cooperate with the Holy Land, who can stop me? The badly damaged Rothschild? The Shadow Throne that is in disarray? The Dark Knights? Who do they think they are?" He did not go on. But Lin Yuxian understood what he meant. The Shadow Throne of Rothschild was nothing. Most of his roots were in the European continent. In the eyes of the Celestial Emperor of Huawu, he was naturally nothing. "You can try," Lin Yuxian said lightly. "Brother, you are no match for me. I don't want to fight with the Lin clan. The Lin clan has been with the Li family for hundreds of years. The Lin clan can ignore a bastard, but I still care." Lin Yuxian just sneered. No one would believe this kind of nonsense to deceive a child. His style of doing things for so many years had clearly shown that he would not let go of the Lin clan. He dared to give so much to the Lin clan because he was confident that he could swallow the entire Lin clan in the future. In this case, what did it matter if he gave more? "Brother, you seem to be dissatisfied with my Li family. You know very well how your Li family rose to the top." Lin Yuxian said lightly. "Do you mean the Dongqing clan in those days?" The Celestial Emperor of Huawu said softly, "I know that, and I plan to compensate them." "Compensate?" Lin Yuxian mocked. "If I remember correctly, you want to kill the only descendant of the Dongqing clan, right?" "Who said he is the only one?" The Celestial Emperor of Huawu said lightly, "When I came to Dalos, I saw the CEO who studied with you. She was a very young beauty with a slim figure and an elegant manner. She was very good. What do you want?" Lin Yuxian's face suddenly changed. "I will take her away and accept her." The Celestial Emperor of Huawu said lightly, "I want her to give birth to a son for me. In the future, let me and her son inherit the Li family. How about that?" Lin Yuxian suddenly stood up and rushed to the door without saying a word. "Brother, you are impulsive." The voice of the Celestial Emperor of Huawu floated. Lin Yuxian suddenly turned back. In his line of sight, an incomparably brilliant sword light suddenly lit up. "Sister." "Godfather," the slender teenager rushed into Lin Yuxian's exclusive bedroom in the underground. In some crowded space, countless mechanical equipment was working hard, making a buzzing sound. Dongqing Yu, who wore a long white dress and had long hair, sat on a chair in a daze. Her big eyes were red and swollen, as if she had just cried. Seeing the teenager rush in, she forced a smile and whispered, "Dongqing, Godfather went in?" Li Dongqing held his sister's cold palm, skillfully operated the medical equipment on the side, and transferred the situation in the hibernation chamber. A somewhat illusory figure appeared on the screen. Countless body data flashed beside the illusory figure. Li Dongqing did not look at the data. His eyes were fixed on the humanoid illusory figure representing his godfather on the screen. The illusory figure shook slightly. In his sight, Li Dongqing could clearly see that the illusory figure representing his godfather was missing an arm. The celestial emperor of Huawu came to the European continent. Lin Fengting's figure came over. The corner of Li Dongqing's mouth moved, and he whispered, "Godfather, the injury is very serious." Lin Fengting whispered, "The loss of an arm has some impact on his strength, but it's worth it." The other party wanted to take Ye. If Yu Xian didn't fight desperately, neither of them would come back this time. Now, at least he came back. It's good that he came back. Take my sister. Li Dongqing's voice was in a trance. An old cow eats young grass. He wants Ye to give him a son to inherit the Li family. Ha, Lin Fengting laughed, but, don't worry. Ye will stay at home in the future. I'm not dead yet. No matter how crazy Huawu is, he won't behave atrociously here. Li Dongqing was completely silent. Even the sound of breathing was completely restrained. He stared deeply at the illusory figure with one arm missing on the screen. Endless depression continued to spread with him as the center. Do you still want revenge? Lin Fengting asked. Yes. It was a simple answer. Plain and light. Do you know what you're going to face? Lin Fengting's voice was gentle. He's the strongest person in this world and this era. He's really invincible and also the strongest superpower in this era. It's not easy to take revenge. It's really not easy. Yes. What are you going to do? There was silence. After a long silence, Li Dongqing looked at his godfather who was sleeping in the hibernation cabin. Master. Yes. I want to go out for a walk. Li Dongqing's voice was soft. Look at the world and see how invincible it is. Okay. Lin Fengting nodded. When you officially enter the Qi-controlling realm, you can go out and have a look. Yes. 16 years old. Qi-controlling realm. Li Dongqing, who had no bottlenecks in his body and will, began to formally contact martial arts at the age of 12. His foundation was unimaginably solid. But in the past 4 years, he didn't even enter the Qi-controlling realm, the most basic of the 4 realms of martial arts. It didn't make sense at all. Lin Fengting didn't know what was going on. Is the Qi-controlling realm enough? Li Dongqing asked. Lin Fengting didn't answer but asked, do you know what your godfather has been doing all these years? Li Dongqing shook his head. He is taking care of some of the properties left by your parents. Lin Fengting said slowly, when they were alive, that was their era. After your father died, Emperor Dong's palace fell apart, and the remaining properties were less than 1/10. What your godfather has done these years is to gather up some of the things that were barely left. After so many years of development, what he has now, although it is less than 1/10 of what Emperor Dong's palace used to be, it can be regarded as a relatively objective foundation. And this foundation was originally taken care of by him on behalf of your parents, and he wanted to hand it over to you. This time when the Emperor of Huawu comes to the European continent, your foundation will probably shrink a lot, but there are still a few people left by your parents, and there is no doubt that they are loyal. I will give you their contact information. If you want to go out, they should be able to protect your safety as long as the Emperor of Huawu doesn't take action personally. But you also have to give them hope. A 16-year-old in the Qi-controlling realm, in the outside world, people who don't know the secret of your body will not be too disappointed. But if you leave the Lin clan and haven't officially stepped into the 4 realms of martial arts, what do you think they will think? Li Dongqing was silent for a long time before he whispered, the hope I give them should not be so cheap. Lin Fengting glanced at him. Li Dongqing slowly reached out his hand. An extremely condensed sword energy slowly formed at his fingertips. The sword energy twisted and shone in his hand. In the narrow space, there was a sudden burst of ear-piercing explosions. Li Dongqing's aura began to rise sharply. The sword energy began to contain a storm. The storm changed and instantly turned into frost. The frost began to burn fiercely in the silence. The fire was extremely dazzling. The thunder roared. The electric arc flashed. Li Dongqing's aura instantly reached the peak. That deep blue electric arc danced in his hand, incomparably enchanting. In an instant, Li Dongqing went straight into the half-step invincible realm. He looked at Lin Fengting and whispered, "This should be enough." Chapter 1278. The light flickered. The soft light wasn't radiating. Instead, it was like water ripples, spreading layer by layer in the place where it first lit up. The darkness in the room was gradually dispelled by the gradually spreading light. The light increased and became softer. The four walls gradually became clear in his line of sight. A tall and slender young man dressed in white walked forward quietly. The light spread to the entire room. All the light was absorbed by the walls around him. On the walls, strings of characters were engraved neatly and meticulously. They were in different languages, but they weren't messy at all. Instead, they had a beautiful sense of harmony. They were Hebrew and Latin. The two languages engraved neatly on the walls seemed to be telling a story one after another. As the light gathered, every character in the room was shimmering with a faint light, mysterious and sacred. The young man walked to the center of the room. His eyes slowly moved along the Hebrew on the wall and moved to the Latin area. He saw the blurry and sacred murals behind the two prophecies. He saw the golden holy sword and olive branch placed in the center of the room. Below the sword and the olive branch, an old man in a white robe smiled quietly and looked at him with a gentle gaze. An old man that was hard to describe with specific words. The white robe seemed to be just a symbol of him. His face was clear and blurry, and people would instantly forget it after seeing it. He sat there quietly, but vaguely, he gave people a feeling that he was completely out of the scope of a human. He had become a spirit. A pure spirit that contained many emotions. Deep, quiet, serene, peaceful. Majestic, joyful, gentle, compassionate. All kinds of emotions kept alternating in his eyes, turning into a gentle but irresistible spiritual storm that kept spreading in different directions. The young man in white looked at him and bowed slightly. The old man smiled in satisfaction, and his voice was filled with joy. "Sit down, child." The young man nodded and sat opposite the old man. The words on the wall still reflected the mysterious light. In the shining light, the young man's blurry figure suddenly began to become three-dimensional and clear. The old man stared deeply at the young man in white before him. He wasn't handsome, he wasn't feminine, he wasn't tough. If he had to use a word to describe him, the young man in front of him was perfect. His appearance, his body, his temperament, his every move, if taken apart, might not be considered outstanding, but when all of these were combined together, it gave people a feeling of perfection. This kind of perfection seemed to emit a bright light, completely and unobtrusively covering his thoughts and his various emotions. This feeling reminded the old man of the child's mother. His eyes flickered even more, and the invisible spiritual storm that was hidden also began to surge violently. The young man sat quietly and did not speak for a while. The old man did not speak either. Time passed in silence for nearly 2 minutes. Footsteps came from outside the room again. 2 men, one big and one small, walked in one after another. The white-robed old man smiled and said softly, "Child, let me introduce you." "Excuse me." He pointed at the man who walked in first and said slowly, "This is St. Thomas." He did not mention the other party's specific position, nor did he need to. In this place, those who could add the word saint in front of their names were important figures who had been spiritually crowned by the Saint Emperor of the Sanctuary. And in this era of the Sanctuary, only St. Thomas had been crowned by the Saint Emperor. The young man slowly turned his head, glanced at Thomas, and nodded slightly. This one. The old man pointed at the figure next to Thomas. Compared with Thomas, who was burly and strong like a human-shaped violent bear, standing next to him was an Oriental man. He had a standard face from the continent, was thin, and had an easygoing and elegant temperament. When the old man pointed at him, he was also looking at the motionless young man sitting in the seat with a somewhat complicated look in his eyes. You should be familiar with this one. The old man's smile was very warm. He is a famous painter in the dark world, a calligrapher, and one of the 3 invincible realm experts in the purgatory of heaven capital. He is about to join our sanctuary and take charge of the Knights Templar for us. The young man raised his head again as the old man spoke. His eyes fell on the Oriental man who was about to join the sanctuary and take charge of the Knights Templar. The old man's voice continued, from tomorrow on, he will become the center of the dark world. His existence represents the intimacy between the purgatory of heaven capital and the sanctuary. We will be allies forever and welcome the era that belongs to us together. The old man's tone was getting higher and higher. Let me formally introduce him to you. This is the collector, child. To be honest, he is your father's uncle and used to be your father's right-hand man, Li Huazhang. The young man's eyes were completely calm, like a deep pool. Li Huazhang. Of course, he was no stranger to the name. His godfather gnashed his teeth every time he mentioned it. The predecessor of the purgatory of heaven capital was the Li family of Jianghu state. His father was from the Li family. And Li Huazhang was a direct descendant of the Li family. Li Huazhang's martial arts talent was not good. It could be said that Emperor Dong's palace had made great efforts to break through and become an invincible realm expert. At the beginning, when Emperor Dong's palace and the purgatory of heaven capital fought for the orthodox position of the Li family, Li Huazhang was in the purgatory of heaven capital, but he did not agree with the idea of the purgatory of heaven capital, so he went to Emperor Dong's palace. When Dong Huang was alive, he trusted him greatly. At that time, he could be said to be Dong Huang's right-hand man, loyal and devoted. After the fall of Emperor Dong and the destruction of Emperor Dong's palace, the purgatory of heaven capital devoured the flesh and blood of Emperor Dong's palace as quickly as possible, and Li Huazhang joined the purgatory of heaven capital again. Moreover, he was also put in an important position. Now that he had joined the sanctuary and was about to take charge of the holy hall and the sanctuary, it was said to be a symbol of friendship between the purgatory of heaven capital and the sanctuary. It was like a mascot, but everyone knew the actual meaning. That was the deal. It was a deal between the sanctuary and the purgatory of heaven capital. The sanctuary had handed over the framework and countless elites of the quasi-super force of Knights Templars in this transaction, and the purgatory of heaven capital would inevitably pay something of the same value. Li Huazhang's appearance in the European continent at this time meant that from now on, everything in the purgatory of heaven capital and the European continent would be decided by Li Huazhang. This kind of status could be said to be below only one person and above tens of thousands. Why could Li Huazhang be valued in both the purgatory of heaven capital and Emperor Dong's palace? The young man actually understood. In the eyes of outsiders, Li Huazhang was repeatedly jumping sideways. But the most fundamental reason was the shackles in the depths of his soul, the Li family. Whether it was Emperor Dong's palace or the purgatory of heaven capital, they all belonged to the Li family. Li Huazhang's position had never changed. He just did it for the Li family, and he had a clear conscience about the Li family. The young man really understood this kind of mentality. So he bowed slightly to Li Huazhang, who was no longer young or even middle-aged, and said in a calm voice, "Little grandpa." According to seniority, Li Huazhang was indeed the young man's little grandpa. The look in Li Huazhang's eyes became more and more complicated. He nodded with some relief and excitement in his eyes. The young man fell silent again and stopped talking. Time passed slowly. The old man in white looked at him with gentle eyes and said with a smile, "Child, what do you want to say when you want to see us?" They all knew the identity of the young man in front of them. A few days ago, Emperor Huawu came to the European continent in person. Lin Yuxian of the Lin clan, who was already at the peak of the invincible realm, had an arm cut off. While everyone was waiting for the Lin clan's reaction and counterattack, the young man in front of them, who had been living in many people's rumors, walked out of the Lin clan for the first time. He was the son of Dong Huang and that demoness. For more than 10 years, the shadow that the couple left on the whole dark world was far from completely dissipating. Their son entered the secular world for the first time, and the whole dark world focused on him. But no one expected that the young man came to the Holy Land at this time and asked to see the Saint Emperor of the Holy Land. This was His Majesty Saint Emperor, who held the faith of more than 1 billion people in the world. It was reasonable for the Saint Emperor to refuse this meeting. Even if the young man's parents had died, the identity of the young man, since he came to the gate of the Holy Emperor Palace, was worthy of the Saint Emperor meeting him in person. However, although the Saint Emperor agreed to meet, he also sent a message to Emperor Huawu, who had gone to Germany yesterday. The elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital should have arrived outside the Holy Emperor Palace at this time. And Emperor Huawu should be on his way back at this time. The Saint Emperor in a white robe looked at the calm child in front of him playfully. He didn't know whether the child knew his situation or not. Why did he come here to look for him? It couldn't be to persuade him to give up the cooperation with the Purgatory of Heaven capital and then become the enemy of Emperor Huawu, could it? If that was the case, then it would be too naive. I want to repent. The young man sat on the sofa. In the soft light, surrounded by countless Latin and Hebrew words, his voice was soft and sincere. I am guilty. The Saint Emperor, Saint Thomas, Li Huazhang, the air was eerily silent. There were churches and believers all over the world in the Holy Land. There were priests and countless people repenting every day. But there were really not many people in the world who were qualified to let the Saint Emperor personally listen to their confession. And now, this young man with a special identity. This young man who attracted the attention of the dark world. Him. He wanted to repent? The Saint Emperor's eyes were a little dazed. For a moment, he didn't understand what was going on. He was a little dazed and a little excited that he didn't realize. He opened his mouth and almost instinctively said, "Child, what do you want to repent for?" His voice was low and softer. The young man was still sitting, without any movement or kneeling down. He just said softly, "I have committed the crime of cowardice. I have an enemy that I have no way of defeating at the moment. My parents and family all died because of him. My current family member, the person I respect the most, had an arm cut off by him. I want revenge, but I'm a little confused. Your Majesty, what should I do?" The Saint Emperor, I have also committed the crime of rage. Because my enemy has found an ally that I also have no way of defeating. They are very close to me, and I am very close to them now. I am angry at their alliance and cooperation. I want to destroy their alliance this time. Your Majesty, what should I do? The Saint Emperor, the youth continued to speak calmly. He was clearly repenting, but between the lines, there was a chilling calmness that sent chills down one's spine. The light in the room flickered. In places where the light did not shine, extreme coldness began to silently bare its fangs and claws in the dark. I am also guilty of jealousy. Because of my enemy, everything he had should have belonged to me. But they worked together to take it away from me. I don't think that's fair. I want to do many things, but because of jealousy, I'll commit even more crimes. Your Majesty, what should I do? Under the cloak of darkness, cruelty began to show its edge. I've also committed the sin of arrogance. I have an enemy. I'm not his match, but I still look down on him. I think he doesn't deserve all of this. Those things are all mine. As long as I have time, I'll take them all back. Everything that happened in the past will not end. I will grasp everything in my hands again. This is greed. Child, greed is a sin. The sage emperor finally spoke. The youth lowered his head and said softly, I'm guilty. Waves after waves of mental storms slowly gathered towards the young man. The sage emperor's eyes began to shine. He was quietly altering the youth's consciousness. At that time, whether it was turning him into a devout believer, or whether it was to hand him over to the purgatory of heaven capital, this was something that had to be done. The light in the room began to distort under the mental power of the transcendent state. The mental power that could even affect the chosen one began to spread wantonly. The corners of the sage emperor's mouth rose slightly, gentle and kind. Pray, child. Let God see your piety. I will also pray for you. As long as you repent sincerely, God will forgive your mistakes. He stood up, walked over to the youth, took his hand, and said with a smile, "Come with me to the confessional. Let's pray together. Your sins will be purified and you will be forgiven." The youth stood up and looked into the sage emperor's eyes. His voice was a little confused, almost like he was talking in his sleep. "God will not forgive me." The sage emperor was stunned. The youth's voice continued, "But I have found a way to solve the problem." "What way?" The sage emperor laughed, not at all nervous. His mental power had already invaded the child's brain. Even if he really had a way, it would not be a solution if he said it now. "I can't destroy my enemy for the time being," the youth said softly, "but I can weaken him." He looked into the sage emperor's eyes. "For example, I can first get rid of his partners and make him lose his allies in the European continent. That way, I can better protect some things." Get rid of his partners. The sage emperor narrowed his eyes and smiled. "Child, you have sinned. You should kneel and pray sincerely. Please forgive me for my arrogance." "Your Majesty." The youth said softly, "I have sinned, but I can't see." As if he was mumbling to himself, the cruelty and savagery in the darkness broke through in an instant. The youth's voice continued, "If your Majesty can see, why don't you go to heaven for me and see what other sins I have committed?" A sense of unease and coldness that shouldn't have appeared arose from the depths of the sage emperor's heart. He frowned slightly. The youth released the sage emperor's hand. He took a step to the left. The air instantly twisted. An incomparably powerful mental storm swept over. But the youth's figure did not pause. He took a step to the left. The youth's hand reached into the void and clenched tightly. Beside him, the sage emperor's figure instantly shattered. The youth's tightly clenched hand directly pulled out a new sage emperor from the void. The light and darkness completely dissipated. The peace was completely shattered. The moment the sage emperor's true body was grabbed, the surrounding environment created by mental energy completely disappeared. Only the sacred sword and olive branch in the center of the room remained, dignified and calm. The sage emperor's eyes and expression froze. He was confused. He didn't expect the child to be unaffected by his mental energy and even see through the location of his true body. "How did you?" he wanted to ask the child how he did it. In his line of sight was still that youthful face of 16 years old. Calm, and indifferent. This seemingly well-behaved child did not intend to answer his question at all. He didn't want the sage emperor to ask his own question either. The moment he confirmed the sage emperor's true body, he tilted his head. The dark blue lightning that had been condensed to the extreme turned into an incomparably pure sword energy. The sword energy blossomed from his hand. Light and blood splattered at the same time. One of the sage emperor's arms left his body. He took a step forward. Under the intense pain, the sage emperor, who felt the real danger, completely focused his mind. His mouth opened, and his pupils contracted slightly. Boom! The mental energy that pervaded the entire Holy Emperor Palace vibrated and burst out like a substance. This was the peak power of the transcendent realm. This kind of power didn't have real lethality. But it could easily affect the real chosen one, the current emperor of Huawu, and make the experts at the peak of the invincible realm completely lost and unable to find his direction. The sage emperor didn't know martial arts. But no matter who he faced, he was innately invincible. The vast mental energy was boiling fiercely. The sage emperor looked at the youth in front of him and laughed. His eyes were clear and calm, without any ripples, like an abyss. When you stared into the abyss stared back at you. The youth, who was surrounded by sword light, took a step forward. The sword light gathered. The power pervaded. The sharpness shone. The youth raised his palm and waved it in front of the sage emperor. It was an understatement. He lifted something heavy as if it were light. The sage emperor, who was desperately releasing his mental energy, flew up. He was infinitely close to the crystal chandelier on the ceiling. The magnificent Holy Emperor Palace began to tumble and hang upside down in front of him. Warm blood flowed out. The moment the darkness fell, the ferocity and sharpness intertwined. The sage emperor saw his headless body. Blood gushed out of the sage emperor's body and spilled on the youth's white clothes. The red became the most dazzling color in the dark world. Fast. Too fast. There was not the slightest bit of delay. It was so straightforward that it was unbelievable. Until the sage emperor's head was in the youth's hand again. Then, St. Thomas's furious and miserable howl suddenly sounded. The sage emperor. Was he killed? An unparalleled sense of absurdity and confusion hit his mind. It was like a joke that wasn't funny at all. But the joke actually happened. The sage emperor, who stood at the peak of the world, was easily beheaded by a child who could ignore all mental energy. When this happened, he, the killing angel of the Holy Land, didn't even have a second to react. Thomas's howl was distorted to the extreme. The rolling sound waves surged under the night sky of the Holy Emperor Palace. The huge and pure power was completely boiling. The power belonging to the peak of the invincible realm was all condensed in his hands. He raised his hands. The mental storm before the sage emperor's death was still spreading. The youth grabbed the sage emperor's head and took a step toward Thomas. In the next second, the surging mental storm completely drowned the killing angel, who was second only to one person in the Holy Land and above thousands of people. Thomas's figure suddenly froze on the spot. The explosive power gathered in his hands directly exploded in front of him at the moment when he was in a trance. Blood flew everywhere. Visible cracks appeared on Thomas's body one after another. The power and domain that kept boiling and exploding around him were still raging. Li Huazhang, who was covered in sword light, was directly swept away and fell hard to the ground. Blood flowed out of his mouth like boiled water. A little power hit the youth who was covered in blood. This force easily tore apart the sword light on his body. The youth's face was pale, but he didn't stop at all and kept moving forward. The sage emperor was dead. The mental storm before his death only lasted for a few seconds before it began to dissipate quickly. Thomas, who was full of cracks all over his body, kept trembling. He stared at the approaching youth almost crazily and gnashed his teeth. Li Dong. City. Li Dongcheng. How dare you, you. The youth blinked his eyes. The sword light shone. The killing angel of the Holy Land. An expert at the peak of the invincible realm who ranked fourth on the world divine list. St. Thomas's head flew directly into the sky, and blood gushed out. It was as neat and tidy. A transcendent realm expert. A peak of the invincible realm expert. An invincible realm expert. The combination that should have had the strength to kill the youth in seconds, but because of an accident, the two of them died in an instant. No one could have thought that Li Dongqing could ignore the mental power of the transcendent realm expert. How strong was his will? This was something that no one dared to think about. Li Dongqing grabbed Thomas's head and came to Li Huazhang. Li Huazhang was covered in blood, and his aura was extremely weak. He saw Li Dongqing coming over and shook his head with a bitter smile. "Little grandpa, are you okay?" Li Dongqing helped him up and said softly. "You shouldn't have killed them." Puff. In the slight and dull sound, Li Huazhang suddenly opened his eyes wide. He lowered his head in disbelief. In his sight, Li Dongqing was still holding him with one hand, and the other hand had let go of Saint Emperor and Thomas's heads. His 5 fingers directly stabbed into his abdomen. Li Dongqing's voice was still calm. "It's okay. I came here today to kill them. Without them, the Holy Land will be leaderless. It will either fall apart or fall into internal strife. The purgatory of heaven capital will lose its partners in Europe, and its influence will decline. Even if the Emperor of Huawu wants to continue to attack me, I will not become the main target of the purgatory of heaven capital. With so many benefits left by the Holy Land, even if the purgatory of heaven capital can stabilize, the other forces in Europe can't. If the purgatory of heaven capital wants to march into Europe, it will inevitably cause fierce resistance from all the forces in Europe. Without allies, they can only be in a stalemate with the major forces in Europe. He reached out and clenched, pulling out Li Huazhang's intestines. In the dripping blood. The pungent smell of blood permeated the air. Li Huazhang's eyes turned white. The vitality of the invincible realm would not let him die, and the will of the invincible realm would not make him faint. The severe pain made him grab Li Huazhang's shoulder tightly and tremble constantly. There are so many forces in Europe, and the Holy Land is leaderless. Compared with them, we are already hard bones. My godfather is not dead, and my master is also here. Even if Li Huawu wants to deal with me, he has to clean up the other forces in Europe first. He won't choose us, the most powerful one. In this way, I can further integrate the foundation left by my parents. Little grandpa, don't you think so? Puff. An extremely exquisite dagger slipped out of Li Dongqing's sleeve. Li Dongqing directly stabbed Li Huazhang's thigh. Li Huazhang screamed painfully and powerlessly. Cold sweat oozed from his forehead. His face was pale, and his trembling became more obvious. You want to kill me, my Li family, I know. Li Dongqing nodded and whispered, I know, little grandpa, I really understand. You did it for the Li family. From the purgatory of heaven capital to Emperor Dong's palace, from Emperor Dong's palace to the purgatory of heaven capital, everyone understands and understands you. I also understand you. I really can understand you. For the Li family, I understand. The dagger began to slide. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. The tendons of the thigh were directly cut by the blade of the dagger. Blood kept flowing. Li Dongqing, who was doing all this slowly, did not have the slightest change in his eyes. He was as calm as water. But what does this have to do with me? What does the Li family have to do with me? Oh, it does. Emperor Huawu. Purgatory of heaven capital. We have a grudge. How can I forget? Little grandpa, we have to settle the blood feud slowly. Thomas and Saint Emperor are actually good people. You see, I killed Saint Emperor, and Saint Emperor affected Thomas with his own spiritual power. Thomas injured himself and then you. Isn't the situation beautiful now? Li Dongqing said seriously, they are all good people, so I let them die without pain. Li Dongqing muttered to himself, but the Li family is different, the Li family is really different. A great fear occupied all of Li Huazhang's consciousness. His eyes were even a little dazed, with a kind of regret. Li Dongqing didn't want to know what he regretted. The dagger was pulled out and fell again. This was the first time Li Dongqing had killed someone. He killed Saint Emperor of the Transcendent Realm. He killed Thomas, the killing angel. He was killing Li Huazhang. His palm did not tremble at all. He kept waving the dagger in his hand, destroying every intact corner of Li Huazhang's body. Pieces of flesh and blood kept splashing. Li Dongqing didn't know when Li Huazhang died. When he felt that everything was satisfactory, only Saint Emperor and Thomas's headless body were left in the room. And Li Huazhang's head. Li Dongqing, whose white clothes were completely dyed red with blood, stood up, picked up Li Dongqing's head, and walked out of the door. Inside the Holy Emperor Palace, a large number of holy knights and elites of the Purgatory of Heaven capital who realized that something was wrong had rushed in. Li Dongqing stood in front of the door, watching the crowd approaching, and suddenly threw out Li Huazhang's head in his hand. When the head flew in the air, the sword energy exploded from the inside of the head. Flesh and blood were everywhere. Li Dongqing laughed and said, "Eat watermelon, sweet." Your Majesty, Wudong Group has completed the acquisition of Xianxia Group. Lin Yuxian will be expelled from the board of directors of Xianxia Group in the near future. On the bustling streets of Dongdu, a charming young woman hung up the phone in her hand and reported in a soft voice. It's faster than I expected. The middle-aged emperor of Huawu was dressed in casual clothes. He looked around at his own country and said slowly, "Have you found any trace of the child?" There was a flash of resentment in the young woman's eyes, and she shook her head slightly. Her name was Li Yuding, and she was just an ordinary female official in the royal family of East Island. But in the purgatory of Heaven capital, she was Li Huawu's personal secretary. In the absence of specific instructions from Li Huawu, Li Yuding handled the daily affairs of the purgatory of Heaven capital on behalf of him most of the time. The purgatory of Heaven capital and the royal family were carefully integrating. In Li Huawu's plan, Li Yuding was completely cultivated as the CEO on his territory in the future. Because of her background, he could absolutely trust her. Today, there were not many old people left in the Li family. Among those old people, there were even fewer descendants. Among the descendants, those who had the ability, vision, and means were even rarer. And Li Yuding, among the descendants left by the veterans of the Li family, was the most outstanding. Li Huawu had planned to cultivate her slowly, but since her father died in an extremely tragic way in Europe 5 years ago, in order to appease people, he had to raise Li Yuding as soon as possible. This was actually not a good thing. Under great pressure, Li Yuding had not lived an easy life in the past few years. It's a little strange. Li Huawu said in surprise, Xianxia Group is not a small thing. With that child's character, why didn't he come out to stir up trouble this time? Maybe he's afraid? Li Yuding said blandly. It's useless to be afraid. He knows it himself. Li Huawu shook his head slowly. At this time, it's too late to beg for mercy. If I don't kill him, I can't explain to many people, including your father. Li Yuding bit her lip and said softly, Your Majesty, Yuding only has one request. If you can catch that bastard, don't be in a hurry to kill him. Cripple him first. I want to pay him back 10 times or 100 times for what he did to my father. Li Yuding was Li Huazhang's daughter. Since Li Dongqing officially entered the secular world 5 years ago, his shadow could be seen everywhere in the dark world. His first entry into the secular world was really too dazzling. A 16-year-old half-step invincible realm expert. He destroyed the entire Holy Land the first time he made a move. No matter how coincidental it was, since the incident, the whole dark world had been in an uproar and paid more attention to the child who was only in his teens. Today, Li Dongqing was already 21 years old. In the past 5 years, the purgatory of Heaven capital had chased him more than once. In the beginning, several half-step invincible realm experts joined forces. In recent years, Daybreak, who was at the peak of the invincible realm, had come out. Li Huawu had even taken action once. But Li Dongqing had escaped all of them. This year, Li Dongqing was still at the half-step invincible realm, but all kinds of signs showed that the bastard had gradually begun to grow. Although he had not entered the invincible realm, he already had the strength close to the peak of the invincible realm. This kind of strength had become a big problem for the purgatory of Heaven capital. At least, it meant that the situation where Daybreak alone could make the other party extremely embarrassed in the past no longer existed. If Li Dongqing was fully prepared, it was even possible for Daybreak to die. And it was not convenient for Li Huawu to take action himself. It was okay to confirm the other party's position and get ready. But if he always showed up, but he couldn't keep Li Dongqing, this result would be too embarrassing for the purgatory of Heaven capital. In 5 years, there had been 40 hunts. Nearly 20 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and 6 half-step invincible realm in the purgatory of Heaven capital had died. Li Dongqing had been seriously injured more than 30 times. Daybreak had been seriously injured once. Li Huawu had failed to take action once. No one could have imagined that Li Dongqing's rise would be so fast. Now he had completely taken over everything that Lin Yuxian had once controlled, deeply rooted in the European continent, and was called Little Donghuang. The purgatory of Heaven capital could even clearly feel the pressure that Little Donghuang brought to them. That was the real pressure of facing death. Under such circumstances, the purgatory of heaven capital finally began to gradually change, and once again strongly intervened in the messy European continent. The Holy Land had been destroyed. The purgatory of heaven capital had found a new partner. Rothschild. There was obviously another superpower in the cooperation between the two sides. The Wang family of Beihai. So recently, not only the European continent, but also the situation in Jianghu state was also changing. The cooperation between the purgatory of heaven capital and Rothschild meant that Li Huawu had let go of some of the knots in his heart and began to cooperate with the Wang family of Beihai. The Wang family of Beihai had no room to refuse, even if they knew that it was like asking a tiger for its skin. But the rise of Li Dongsheng made them more uneasy. In the past 5 years, as little Dong Huang grew up step by step, his cruelty and madness were completely exposed to the people of the dark world. He was a madman who had completely broken out after being suppressed to the extreme. He was unscrupulous and had no bottom line. He never minded killing people or even hurting himself. In this state, he could not even see any humanity. He was a madman who hated the world to the extreme and wanted to drag everyone to die with him. If Li Dongxing suppressed the purgatory of heaven capital, then not only the purgatory of heaven capital, but also the entire Wang family of Beihai would definitely not survive. The cooperation was naturally formed. With the help of Rothschild in the European continent, the purgatory of heaven capital began to suppress the sword pavilion in all aspects. Yes, the sword pavilion. Emperor Dong's palace no longer existed. After Li Dongxing entered Emperor Dong's palace, he directly changed the name of the organization to Sword Pavilion. In the past 5 years, the Sword Pavilion, Little Dong Huang, and famous Sword Heaven's Wrath were the most bloody color in the dark world. The purgatory of heaven capital temporarily restrained its edge in the European continent, and then began to suppress the living space of the Sword Pavilion in other areas. The acquisition plan of Xianxia Group was their top priority last year and this year. After 2 years of commercial war, various resources, and the constant confrontation of power, the purgatory of heaven capital finally completely swallowed the Xianxia Group today. This meant that 1/3 of the economic power of the Sword Pavilion was completely swallowed by Rothschild and the purgatory of heaven capital. Next, it was the Senya Group of the Sword Pavilion. Li Huawu thought silently. He suddenly wanted to know what the bastard could do after the Senya Group was also swallowed. Boom! Without warning, a violent roar suddenly sounded on the streets of Dongdu. Li Huawu, who was in contemplation, suddenly raised his head and looked into the distance. A few blocks away, a proud skyscraper was shaking in the violent roar. The building was on fire, and black smoke filled the sky. Beside Li Huawu, Li Yuding's cell phone rang at the same time. What? As soon as she heard 2 sentences, her face changed in an instant. Your Majesty, Li Yuding looked at Li Huawu with the phone in her hand, and her voice trembled. Say it. Li Huawu looked into the distance with no expression. Wudong Group. He family, which controls Wudong Group on our behalf. 3 minutes ago, the whole family was destroyed, Li Yuding said in a trembling voice. Wudong Group had acquired the Xianxia Group. And the skyscraper in the distance that exploded and caught fire was the headquarters of Wudong Group. It was done by Li Dongsheng. Li Yuding answered the phone and suddenly screamed, Li Dongsheng is in Dongdu. He hasn't left yet. He's on the roof of the Wudong building. Li Huawu's figure instantly faded and disappeared completely. The next moment, under the clear sky, the extremely sharp sword energy suddenly converged into a torrent. The torrent of sword energy crossed a distance of nearly 10,000 meters in several blocks, like a heavenly knife, and chopped to the roof of the Wudong building. The voice of Emperor Huawu resounded through the world, loud and majestic. Good nephew, since you've come to Dongdu, don't you come to talk to me? A dazzling arc of 7 colors lit up in the distance between heaven and earth. The colorful sword light turned into a blood red. That was the famous sword of the Lin clan. Heaven's Wrath. The sword intent of Heaven's Wrath tore the torrent of sword energy. In the distant sky, Li Dongqing's response sounded, next time for sure. The plain white morning hall was neat and tidy. Inside Worry's manor, there were extremely suppressed cries everywhere. The black and white portrait had been hung up. Wearing morning clothes? Qing Yu's eyes were red and swollen from crying. She knelt in front of the morning hall, her body trembling constantly. On this day, many people came to the Lin clan. The patriarchs of countless branches of the Lin clan. The core members of the Lin clan today. Everyone who should come came. In the black and white portrait, Lin Yuxian was smiling, which seemed to gather endless brilliance and sunshine. Lin Fengting sat quietly in the morning hall, looking at his son's portrait. In just one night, he seemed to have aged a few decades, and his energy, and spirit had completely declined. That year, Li Dongqing was 25 years old. The Purgatory of Heaven capital officially acquired the Senya Group. A large number of elites from the Purgatory of Heaven capital officially entered the European continent. A week ago, the European Alliance officially issued an arrest warrant for Li Dongqing. More than a dozen European powers united to arrest Li Dongqing. 3 days ago, the Heavenly Emperor of Huawu personally came to the European continent, intending to destroy them. Lin Yuxian, an expert at the peak of the invincible realm of the Lin clan and a visiting professor of the Sword Pavilion, fought with the Heavenly Emperor of Huawu to the death and was finally killed by the Heavenly Emperor of Huawu in Ilos. The Lin clan had received the news. The morning hall had been set up. And Lin Yuxian's body was still on the way back. How is Dongqing? Sitting in the chair silently, Lin Fengting looked at Dongqing Yu and asked softly. The injury is almost healed. She can come out in a few days. Dongqing Yu said in a hoarse voice. Li Dongqing returned to the Lin clan with serious injuries half a month ago. He was still in the dormant cabin and did not know the news. That's good. Lin Fengting sighed softly. Master, a hoarse voice suddenly sounded. In the morning hall, the crowd suddenly quieted down. In everyone's sight, Li Dongqing slowly walked into the morning hall. He walked to the portrait of Lin Yuxian, knelt down directly, and whispered, "It's not good. My godfather is gone. As a son, I have to see him." At this time, Lin Fengting frowned. "It's better for you to stay here. I've entered the invincible realm." Li Dongqing said quietly, "No, I am already invincible. Unfortunately, my godfather can't see it. It's too long and there are too many words. It's really hard to avoid bugs. For example, Lin Yuxian has only one arm. But how did that arm disappear? Another example is whether the person in another time and space was killed by his mother or by him. I'm completely confused. In fact, this feeling has appeared many times, and I don't even know which chapter one wrote it in even if I turn to the previous chapters. It's a pain in the ass. So I'll take these chapters as the standard. It's my fault, I apologize." Chapter 1279. The funeral crowd had dispersed. In Carefree Villa of the headquarters of the Lin clan. In the cemetery of the Lin clan. In front of the new grave, Li Dongqing knelt and Lin Fengting stood. Lin Yuxian's body was brought back by Li Dongqing and Lin Fengting. It was Daybreak of the Purgatory of Heaven capital who sent Lin Yuxian back. He was an expert at the peak of the invincible realm and ranked 5th on the world divine list. There was no swords drawn or blood. The two sides agreed on the time and place. The Lin clan brought Lin Yuxian back, while Daybreak and the other 3 experts at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm of the Purgatory of Heaven capital came to the Lin clan together to attend Lin Yuxian's funeral. Emperor Huawu, who had killed Lin Yuxian himself, wrote a eulogy. It was Daybreak who read it. It took 3 days from returning home to the burial. Everything was calm. In the absolute calm, there was extreme depression and silence. Li Dongqing hardly spoke these days, nor did he look at the people of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Most of the time, he knelt in front of Lin Fengting's body with Dongqing Yu. Dongqing Yu was crying. She had completely broken down and cried until she fainted several times. Li Dongqing was the most important person in her life. And Lin Yuxian was the person who had been with her for the longest time in her life. After she left the Lin clan, she had been with Lin Yuxian for more than 10 years. Meticulous care, unreserved guidance, unreserved trust, and incomparably ardent expectations. He was like a ray of light, warm, genial, and inclusive, shining into her soul. He was a teacher and a father. She could play with him, act coquettishly with him, lose her temper with him, or ignore him. Lin Yuxian was not married and had no children. Li Dongqing and Dong Qingyu were his children. They were with Lin Yuxian in the Lin clan. Lin Yuxian and the Lin clan stood in front of them and opened their broad wings to protect them for so many years. Now Lin Yuxian had died. It seemed that the pair of wings that had always protected them had collapsed in half. The Lin clan was still bright, but people could smell a sense of dilapidation. Dong Qingyu was in a trance. After several comas, she began to have a high fever and was forcibly sent to the hospital by Lin Fengting. Li Dongqing had been kneeling. He didn't cry, he didn't make a fuss, he didn't move, and he didn't speak. He was just like how he was when he knew the cause of his parents' death, but he still remained silent. All of his emotions were firmly suppressed, bit by bit, in the deepest part of his heart, even his hatred. The sound of rotors whistling could be heard from afar. The helicopter with the flaming flag slowly took off from the worry-free manor. Flags fluttered in the air. The golden flames had seemingly messy but incomparably beautiful lines. They flickered with golden light under the sunlight, exuding an unreachable and majestic aura. It was the flag of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. 2 years ago, it officially became the flag of the royal family of East Island. Lin Fengting watched the helicopter take off into the distance, took a drag on his cigarette, and said slowly, "The people from the Purgatory of Heaven capital have left." "Yes." "You're not chasing?" "Yes." Lin Fengting stopped talking. Li Dongqing was still kneeling, looking at his godfather's tombstone. On the tombstone, a line of small words was engraved next to Lin Yuxian's photo. "I am Li Dongqing's godfather." This was Lin Yuxian's epitaph. It was said that his godfather had specifically instructed him to do so before he died. "Ha!" Li Dongqing laughed, his nostrils trembled slightly, and he gritted his teeth tightly. "They are here to send my godfather off." Li Dongqing's voice was calm. "They killed my godfather, so it's a grudge. But they are here to send my godfather off, so it's a favor. If I kill the people who come to send my godfather off at his funeral, it's unfilial of me. So I can't chase after them. Anyway, there will always be a chance in the future." Lin Fengting smiled reluctantly and awkwardly. "Go back." He reached out and patted Li Dongqing on the shoulder. He lifted Li Dongqing up with his wrinkled palm. Li Dongqing took a deep breath. It seemed that his body was trembling slightly because he had been kneeling for a long time. A breeze blew through the worry-free manor. The wind rolled up the treetops of the surrounding olive trees, making a soft sound. Li Dongqing looked at everything around him quietly. His eyes swept over the cemetery and saw the buildings in the worry-free manor, the private forest of the Lin clan, the artificial lake, the neat roads, the garden. They were all very familiar scrolls. He looked at them quietly, with some attachment in his eyes. "I'm not going back." Li Dongqing whispered, "I can't go back." Lin Fengting looked at him. "Master, do you still remember the Dongqing clan?" Li Dongqing whispered, "My family, my grandparents, my father, my mother, my aunt, my uncle, my sister, my brother, and all kinds of relatives, over the past 20 years, have died or gone crazy. Only my sister and I are still alive. Rich and powerful, in more than 20 years, speaking of rich and powerful, the Dongqing clan is the most miserable. I can't let the Lin clan become like this, even if it's possible. Master, I've lived here for many years. It's very good here. I'm at ease and happy. But I really don't dare to take this place as my home. Am I supposed to have peace of mind and happiness? My godfather was supposed to inherit the Lin clan, but now he died outside. In recent years, several branches of the Lin clan have been destroyed and suffered heavy losses. Because of who? Li Dongqing patted his chest. It's time to go. I can't go back. In fact, I should have gone a few years ago. My birth was a tragedy. But since I came to this world, I should always bear something. If it weren't for my selfishness, my godfather might not have died. It's not necessary. Lin Fengting said blandly, I'm still alive, and the Lin clan is not in such a bad situation now. If I really make up my mind to fight, I may not be afraid of the purgatory of heaven capital. But I want more than the purgatory of heaven capital. Li Dongqing smiled, and his eyes became a little strange. Subcontinent, European continent, more than 50 countries are after me. The purgatory of heaven capital, the Wang family of Beihai, I want to have fun with them. Lin Fengting was stunned. He suddenly thought of what Li Dongqing said that day and frowned. Have you reached the invincible realm? Not the invincible realm. Li Dongqing said very seriously, it's me who has reached the invincible realm. Lin Fengting took a deep look at him and wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. I came into contact with martial arts at the age of 12. I chose my own path a long time ago. 9 years ago, if my godfather hadn't lost an arm, I could have rushed to the invincible realm in one go after a few years of forbearance. At that time, I was interrupted, just like writing an article. I was suddenly interrupted at the key point and lost my train of thought. Li Dongqing said softly, in the past few years, I have been trying to find my train of thought. I was selfish and wanted to be lazy, but I found that the train of thought could no longer be found. There was no way to be selfish and lazy, so I changed my path and took a step forward. Master, now you are no match for me. In the current dark world, I am invincible. For many years, I have been suppressing myself and controlling myself. Now I am tired, so I want to change my way of life. It's good for the Lin clan and me if I leave. Lin Fengting looked at him quietly and suddenly said, Li Huawu has surpassed the peak of the invincible realm. Li Dongqing shook his head. No. If you must go, then go. Lin Fengting patted his son's tombstone, slowly turned around, and walked to the exit of the cemetery. When you want to come back, you can come back and have a look. I am old, but these old bones can still hold on for a few more years. Li Dongqing did not follow him as he had done many years ago. He did not hold his master's hand as he had done many years ago. Silence, quietness, doting, happiness, the past of more than 20 years began to surge from the beginning. The warmth in his memory was disappearing bit by bit and being pulled out. Li Dongqing quietly watched Lin Fengting walk further and further away. Facing the back that was no longer majestic, he knelt down and kowtowed heavily. The wind whimpered as it flew over the cemetery. Li Dongqing's kneeling figure seemed to be blown away by the wind, turning into streaks of sword energy and disappearing. When the palm fell on her forehead, Dongqing opened her eyes slightly. Her eyes were a little dazed, and her face was pale and extremely haggard. Li Dongqing was stunned. He whispered, Sister, you're not asleep. I want to sleep, but I can't. Dongqing shook her head weakly, and her voice was very low. Li Dongqing sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand without saying anything. Dongqing. Yes. Godfather is dead. Yes. I feel terrible. Yes. Li Dongqing nodded. There was no expression or emotion on his face, as if he was a sculpture with only thoughts. Dongqing sighed softly. She stretched out her hand with a bitter smile and stroked Li Dongqing's face. You are my brother, but after so many years, I feel that I can't see through you. I still don't understand what you are thinking. Are you sad? Yes. Dongqing looked at Li Dongqing's eyes silently. After a long time, she whispered, We dragged the Lin clan down. Yes. What's next? What should we do? Dongqing's whispering voice was filled with confusion. I'm here to pick you up. Li Dongqing said, We will leave the Lin clan and do what we should do. Before I came, I said goodbye to my master. Go? Dongqing seemed to have never thought about leaving the Lin clan. She said blankly, when? Now. But, where is your sword? The wrath of heaven belongs to the Lin clan. It's not ours. In the future, we won't use swords. In the future, what are we going to do? Do what we should do. They didn't go through the discharge procedures, but it didn't count as leaving without saying goodbye. Dongqing, who still had a fever, leaned on Li Dongqing's back and let Li Dongqing carry her out of the private hospital of Welforgetting Villa. The road inside the villa, which was like a small town, was clean and flat. On both sides of the road, there were many shops open for personal interests, not for profit. Dusk had passed. The shops and street lights were lit up. Many people stood at the door of the shop. They quietly looked at the brother and sister who came to the Lin clan more than 20 years ago. They watched them walk on the road out of the Lin clan. No one sent them off. Along the way, there were sighs. It seemed that many people had predicted this scene. The brother and sister were not surnamed Lin, but for so many years, everyone in the villa regarded them as the children of the Lin clan, the little princess and the young master of the Lin clan. But the little princess and the young master had to grow up. From the moment the news of Lin Yoxian's death came, they understood that the brother and sister, who grew up in their love, would eventually bear their responsibilities. Therefore, it was inevitable that he would leave. The light was warm and soft. Li Dongqing walked forward silently with Dongqing on his back. He did not speak or have any expression. He was as quiet as he had been for more than 20 years. Will you come back in the future? Dongqing asked softly. I will come back when I have the chance. Li Dongqing said. He meant to come back. Not to come back. At the end of the road was the gate built according to the structure of the Arc de Triomphe when the villa was first built. It stood in the night, magnificent and ancient. There was no pause, no entanglement, no pain. Li Dongqing carried his sister and walked out of Welforgetting Villa calmly. Outside the villa was a winding mountain road without lights. The silver moon hung high and sprinkled moonlight on the ground. Li Dongqing looked back for the first time and looked at the ancient gate in Welforgetting Villa. He was in a daze, like a child leaving home for the first time. Dongqing was lying on his back, watching as well. A tear fell from her face and fell on Li Dongqing's collar. It was a little cold. Li Dongqing suddenly felt a kind of loneliness that almost overwhelmed all reason. His sister on his back was light and soft. He felt her body temperature. Li Dongqing took a breath gently. She was here. Although it was lonely, he would not be lonely with her. It's just the two of us again. Li Dongqing slowly turned around and went down the mountain along the mountain road. Under the moonlight, the shadows of the two overlapped and were elongated. I still remember the scene of my sister carrying me through the downtown of Huading when I was a child. If there is a chance, we should go back and have a look. I don't remember it very well. Dongqing wiped her tears. She was not like Li Dongqing, who had been stimulated by the spiritual power of the transcendent realm. At that time, she was still very young, and many memories were a little blurred. I just remember that the bread was hard. Li Dongqing smiled, tilted his head, and rubbed his face against Dongqing's cheek. Of course, the bread was hard at that time. Because the soft part had been crushed into bread crumbs by his sister and fed to him at that time. The scenes from back then were so clear, almost eternal and everlasting. Now, it's me carrying my sister. Li Dongqing said softly. Brother has grown up. Dongqing gently touched Li Dongqing's head and smiled reluctantly. You have something on your mind. Li Dongqing said. It was not a question, but a very affirmative statement. I just feel a little sorry for Elder Lin, sorry for my godfather, sorry for the Lin clan. Dongqing once again began to cry. Li Dongqing nodded. Yes. Dongqing, Elder Lin just lost his son. He must feel even worse when we leave. He must be angry and didn't come to see us off. Yes. Dongqing seemed to be a little angry. She clenched her fist and hit Li Dongqing's head with tears. But she was not willing to use force. It's better than being exterminated. Li Dongqing explained. The Lin clan is very strong. Dongqing said softly. Yes. Li Dongqing nodded. He thought for a moment and continued, the Lin clan can't fight against the whole world. But we can. Dongqing was slightly startled. The two walked along the winding mountain road down Worry-Free Mountain. After officially leaving the range of the Lin clan's headquarters, the outside world was a somewhat empty and cold suburb. Li Dongqing was no longer walking. The vast sword energy slowly gathered in the night. He carried Dongqing and directly rushed to the sky. The sound of the wind flew past them. A faint outline of the sword energy appeared around Li Dongqing's body. The sword energy with a warm aura enveloped Dongqing's body. The two flew higher and higher. It was quiet above the sky, only the bright moon and the starry sky were quietly hanging. Sister! Li Dongqing suddenly shouted. Yes? Dongqing tightly wrapped her arms around Li Dongqing's neck. She wasn't afraid of heights, but the two of them were now flying. Carefree Manor had already disappeared. She looked down and saw the lights of the entire city reflected in her eyes. Li Dongqing raised his head and pointed to the bright moon in the sky. The sword energy under his feet flew. Do you want it? Dongqing smiled and pinched his ear. You're talking nonsense again. Li Dongqing narrowed his eyes slightly. There was a flash of thought in his eyes, but he did not continue to speak. The sword light flashed. He lowered his head, looked at the dense and prosperous lights of the city under his feet, and whispered, It's just the two of us again. Dongqing Yu softly nodded. These years, Li Dongqing slowly opened his mouth and said, There are too many things accumulated in my heart, too many. Now, I want the whole world to see them. Snow Country. Mormons. In the majestic and solemn hall, the lights were as bright as day. The shining, almost dazzling light filled every corner of the hall, illuminating the relief and oil paintings on the wall. The young servants of Snow Country were busy, and the long dining table was already filled with a sumptuous dinner. Dongqing sat at one end of the dining table. Li Dongqing sat at the other end of the dining table. There were chairs on both sides of the dining table. No one had come yet, so it seemed a little empty. Li Dongqing sat quietly. His eyes were very quiet, looking at the huge antique wall clock on the wall. The sound of the clock hand echoed in the huge dining room, with a constant and crisp rhythm. Master. A dignified and calm housekeeper in her 30s walked in quickly, bowed slightly, and said softly, The guests are all here. Li Dongqing, who was staring at the wall clock, came back to his senses, nodded, looked at the sumptuous dinner on the table in front of him, and said, Let them in. The housekeeper, who looked smart and capable, turned around and left quickly. There was the sound of the door opening in the hall. Messy footsteps came in from the outside, accompanied by the cold temperature of Snow Country and the whistling wind. The cold air entered the dining room from the hall. Li Dongqing's dull eyes seemed to have recovered a little bit of intelligence. One figure after another walked into the dining room. Different appearances, different heights, different skin colors, different auras. The atmosphere in the dining room seemed to have become the venue of the United Nations as they entered. People from subcontinent, Europeans, Americans, non-continent people, everything was there. But the skin color was just their origin, not their position. There was only one position. People from the Sword Garret. Nominally, Li Dongqing took over everything left by Lin Yuxian, and the team left by Lin Yuxian was the team left by Li Dongqing's parents. At that time, they were still called Emperor Dong's Palace. After Li Dongqing appeared, the organization was renamed Sword Garret. He entered the secular world at the age of 16. Li Dongqing, who was 25 years old this year, had been the Sword Garret master for 9 years. In 9 years, the only thing he did was to change the name of Emperor Dong's palace to Sword Garret. As for the rest of the matters, 9 years had been a mess, from the economy to the wisdom of the people. Li Dongqing did not ask, participate, investigate, or be curious. He was the Sword Garret master. But there was no change in the Sword Garret from the period of Emperor Dong's palace, and Lin Yuxian was still in charge. Now Lin Yuxian had died. Without a leader, the entire Sword Garret was in great uneasiness and turmoil. Li Dongqing could stand up, which made these high-level officials feel relieved. At the same time, they began to instinctively move closer to Li Dongqing. After all, the young man sitting in the dining room at this time was the real young master. They could unite under Lin Yuxian because of their loyalty to the former Donghuang. There was no reason that they would not support Donghuang's son. The high-level officials of the Sword Garret from various fields and places slowly walked into the dining room. The silent brother and sister. The long dining table. The sumptuous dinner. The cold wind of snow country still blew in from outside the door. After a short period of astonishment, everyone bowed at the same time. "Greetings, young master." "Greetings, Mississippi." Dongqing blinked a few times, and looked at Li Dongqing blankly. She knew some of these people, but they were all business talents of the Sword Garret. With the purgatory of Heaven capital constantly suppressing the economic power of the Sword Garret in recent years, there were very few people in this group that Dongqing could recognize. "Sit down." Li Dongqing waved his hand. After they all found a seat and sat down, he glanced around. This was the headquarters of the Sword Garret. 6 years ago, the Sword Garret changed its name, and the headquarters was moved from Italos to Mormons in Snow Country. The tables and chairs here were prepared in advance to ensure that every high-level official of the Sword Garret had their own chair in the dining room of the headquarters. But now when everyone sat down, however, Li Dongqing clearly found that there were at least a dozen empty seats on the table at this time. Li Dongqing glanced around and did not ask why. He just said calmly, "Let's eat." The high-level officials of the Sword Garret responded and began to eat. Li Dongqing held a knife and fork and cut the steak in front of him. His expression was calm and he said nothing. He did not speak, and no one in the dining room took the initiative to speak. The atmosphere was weird and depressing. The dinner ended in a somewhat weird atmosphere. The servants removed the tableware from the table and served dessert and tea after the meal. Li Dongqing took a sip of the tea, and it tasted mediocre. In Snow Country, tea had always been a relatively expensive thing, far more expensive than vodka. Expensive tea was even rarer. The tea at the moment might be very good, but it was still incomparable to the private collection of the Lin clan. Thinking of the Lin clan, Li Dongqing was slightly lost in thought. "Young master." A somewhat low voice sounded. Li Dongqing turned his head and looked around. He found the figure who spoke among the high-level officials. He was very close to him, sitting on his left. He was tall and slender, and his Eurasian face was a bit devilishly handsome. However, the breath all over his body was extremely cold. Among the people present, apart from Li Dongqing and Dongqing, he was the youngest, but he was also the closest to Li Dongqing. "Say it," Li Dongqing said. "Han Donglu." The young man gritted his teeth. "I received the news on the way. Han Donglu's plane crashed over England, and no bones were found. There is sufficient evidence that it was done by Rothschild." Dongqing at the other end of the table trembled slightly. Han Donglu. The former CEO of Emperor Dong's palace. He was the current CEO of the Sword Garret. In the era of Emperor Dong's palace, he was one of the core high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace. In recent years, he had retired. He used to control all the economic and commercial operations of Emperor Dong's palace and the Sword Garret. Even in the face of the suppression of dozens of European countries and the invasion of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, he could hold the economic power of the Sword Garret and stabilize the situation. Although 2 of the 3 most important groups of the Sword Garret had been acquired, Han Donglu was still able to keep some core industries. For the enemies of the Sword Garret, Lin Yuxian was dead, and Han Donglu was the person they wanted to kill the most. He was also Dong Cheng's teacher, or a real master. Lin Yuxian trained Dong Cheng to take over Han Donglu's position. Han Donglu, Li Dongcheng had some impression of the name. He nodded and said calmly, "If he is dead, then he is dead." Does his family still live? He had a daughter in the early years, but she died more than 10 years ago. She died in the hands of the purgatory of heaven capital. The young man sitting next to Li Dongcheng shook his head. That's good. Li Dongcheng said lightly, "They are all dead." It's easy. The young man, all the high-level people, everyone looked at Li Dongcheng with a strange look. Li Dongcheng also looked at them and said in a calm voice, "My godfather is dead." The young man sitting next to him gritted his teeth, and hatred flashed in his eyes. He said in a low voice, "Young master, we are incompetent. What should the sword Garrett do next? Do you have any suggestions?" Li Dongcheng picked up the napkin to wipe the corners of his mouth and asked. "Young master, we have no way to retreat. We can only fight. I suggest declaring war with the purgatory of heaven capital to avenge Mr. Lin. At worst, we will die." Ridiculous. It's easy for you to die. What about the young master? What about the sword Garrett? We are not the opponents of the purgatory of heaven capital now. Are we going to court death? Even if we die, we can hurt the vitality of the purgatory of heaven capital. The heavenly emperor Huawu is still in the European continent. He can destroy most of the sword Garrett alone. How can he hurt the vitality? Let him suffer a minor injury? We should bear it. We still need time. The young master is talented. As long as the young master grows up, he may not be afraid of the heavenly emperor Huawu. How can we bear it? We came to Snow Country from Italos. Isn't it bad enough? Yes, Snow Country is a powerful country in the European continent, but its position in the European continent is very marginal. Do you need me to say it? When the other party attacks, will we have to move our headquarters again? To where? America? And then reduce to going to Africa? Fight. Retreat. Dong, 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 Li Dongcheng reached out and knocked on the table. He whispered, "Don't make noise." The restaurant suddenly became quiet. In fact, there is another choice. Li Dongcheng said lightly. All the high-level officials looked at Li Dongcheng respectfully. Li Dongcheng's eyes were not focused at all. He seemed to be wandering. I came into contact with martial arts at the age of 12. Until the age of 16, there was no change in the realm. That year, my godfather's arm was cut off. I was going to enter the secular world. My master told me that my godfather had been guarding some of the property left by my parents for these years, which is the current sword Garrett. My master said that people's hearts are unpredictable. He doesn't doubt your loyalty, but I should give you some hope. So he asked me to enter the secular world after I reached the chi-controlling realm. That was the day I entered the 4 realms of martial arts, broke through them, and reached the height of half-step invincible realm. I left the Lin clan, came into contact with the sword Garrett, the purgatory of heaven capital, and the real dark world. It has been 9 years now. The dining room was quiet. Everyone looked at him attentively and listened to him. Do you know how I feel? Li Dongcheng asked lightly. Without waiting for their reply, he continued, I'm tired. Yes, for 9 years, I haven't participated in the specific affairs of the sword Garrett, but I still feel tired. Now that my godfather has passed away, the sword Garrett has no leader, so you have another choice. He gently knocked on the table. I have asked people to check everything inside the sword Garrett. After a while, all the assets and resources of the sword Garrett will be completely counted. Dinner has been eaten. After a while, when the list of resources is put on, you can take whatever you like. Out of this door, the sword Garrett will be disbanded. From now on, you can seek refuge in the purgatory of heaven capital, the Lin clan, Rothschild, or any other country. As long as you don't show up in front of me, I won't bother you. Are you satisfied? Everyone stood up, a little flustered. I'm not a qualified leader, so I don't want any force. You can leave now. I'll give you the list of resources later. Take whatever you want. If you're not satisfied, you can grab it from others. I don't mind killing people. If you're not satisfied with me, you can kill me. Of course, I'll fight back. Young master. The young man sitting next to Li Dongqing suddenly kicked the chair behind him and knelt down in front of Li Dongqing. Everyone knelt down. The sword garret can't be disbanded. The young man growled with red eyes. Young master, an old man who had experienced the heyday of Emperor Dong's palace, burst into tears. We have to avenge His Majesty Emperor Dong and Madam. The purgatory of Heaven capital hasn't been destroyed. The sword garret can't be disbanded. The dining hall was full of people kneeling down. Only Li Dongqing and Dongqing were still sitting. The dining table was very long. Dongqing couldn't see her brother's expression clearly. Li Dongqing sat silently and glanced at the dining hall. I feel a little sick, he said softly. Everyone in the dining hall was stunned. You make me sick. You can think that I'm humiliating you. It doesn't matter. I should respect your loyalty and your persistence for so many years. But I'm sorry. I've been preparing for a long time, but I can't find this emotion. I don't care about you. I don't care about your life or death. I don't care about your attitudes and opinions. Disbanding the sword garret is just a choice I gave you. If you don't want to, you can stay. No one will force you. Revenge is my business. If you want to do it, I won't stop you. So, all of you, stand up. From now on, you can do whatever you want. Li Dongqing pointed at the door of the hall. The door was still open. The cold wind from the north was endless. Li Dongqing's voice was calm. The door is there. If you want to leave, you can leave. If you want to die, you can die. I can't be a qualified leader, so I can't be responsible for you. But if you die, I will avenge you. That's all. There was dead silence in the dining hall. Most of the people's faces were pale. Li Dongqing had been in the human world for 9 years. They all knew about the existence of this young master, but they rarely had any formal contact with him. Until now. Today, this young man was sitting in front of them, quiet and indifferent. But everyone could see the age in his young soul behind this calmness. It was extreme indifference and boredom. Who wants to leave? Li Dongqing asked. No one said anything. Maybe the young master in front of them didn't care about them. But after so many years of persistence and loyalty, it had become an obsession in their hearts. If they really wanted to leave, they wouldn't have to worry about a way out. But they followed Emperor Dong's palace to the peak and sword garret to the bottom, and they never left. Why? It was nothing more than revenge. It had even become an unshakable obsession in their lives. Sword garret can't be disbanded. The young man kneeling in front of Li Tianlan gritted his teeth and looked up at Li Dongqing. Young master, we are willing to stay. I'm not your young master. Li Dongqing said blandly. Then, the young man opened his mouth. What's your name? Li Dongqing asked. I'm Azura, young master. This is my name and also my code name. Azura, 28 years old, was a man of sacrifice that Lin Yuxian had secretly trained a long time ago. Now he was the top superior of the half-step invincible realm in the dark world, or in other words, he had the combat capability of the invincible realm. He was talented. If there was no accident, Azura could at least reach the peak of the invincible realm in 10 years. Li Dongqing glanced at him and nodded. From now on, you'll be in charge of the affairs of the organization. Do whatever you want. Don't bother me. Yes, young master. Azura answered loudly. Li Dongqing frowned. I don't like this title. From now on, call me, he gently raised the corner of his mouth. Call me your majesty. Everyone raised their heads and looked at Li Dongqing in astonishment. The name of the sword pavilion doesn't need to exist anymore. Since you don't want to go, I'll take you to hell. I don't like the title of young master, the name of the sword pavilion, and Mormons. Li Dongqing whispered, from today on, the headquarters will be transferred to England. Your Majesty, Azura opened his mouth. He was a little confused and struggled to say, now, should we, don't you trust me? Li Dongqing asked. Azura felt a chill in his heart and shook his head subconsciously. No, it's just. Your Majesty doesn't like the name of the sword pavilion. From now on, we'll be called, Emperor Dong's Palace, the Sword Pavilion. Now, was the organization going to change its name again? In the midst of his chaotic thoughts, Li Dongqing's voice rang in Azura's ears. There seemed to be countless sword energy clanging in his ears and rushing into the sky. Sword Dynasty. Screams, howls, corpses and blood, thick smoke and fire. Chaotic gunshots and violent explosions shook the entire Fog Capital. Fog Capital was already a purgatory on Earth. The killing and the smell of death swept the entire city like a tsunami. The sirens kept echoing over the city. A large number of people in Fog Capital fled in the chaos. Those who couldn't escape all hid in the subway, underground garage, basement and other underground bunkers. Because above the ground, it was a real purgatory on Earth. Blood flowed like rivers, and corpses piled up like mountains. There were traces of destruction everywhere in the city. The streets were full of gullies, the buildings on both sides were smashed into pieces, and there were large deep pits on the ground. The collapsed skyscrapers fell to the ground, the trees were completely smashed, and a large number of corpses were piled up without being sorted out. The fire spread everywhere, and the whole city was ruined and depressed. The whole world seemed to be in a strange silence. No one spoke, no one said anything. All the forces were watching silently. 3 days ago. The European Alliance officially defined the Sword Pavilion as a terrorist organization and offered a worldwide reward for Li Dongqing, the master of the Sword Pavilion. On the same day, the Sword Pavilion announced to the whole dark world that the Sword Pavilion was officially renamed the Sword Dynasty. The elites of the Sword Dynasty gathered and marched from Mormons of Snow Country to the European continent. They didn't take planes or trains or other transportation. The Sword Dynasty completely announced their marching route. The whole world was dumbfounded. This was unimaginably domineering and crazy. On that day, the young man who completely let go of everything after leaving the Lin clan issued a challenge to the whole world in the most extreme way. Blood and killing gathered, setting off a storm of fighting in the dark world. 3 days ago in the evening, 1,500 elites of the Sword Dynasty left Mormons and arrived in Wulan State. Late at night 2 days ago, the elites of the Sword Dynasty passed through Black Swan State and entered Bolton. They officially entered the territory of the European Alliance. The Special Warfare Organization to protect the European Alliance made the most domineering response in the face of this crazy and irrational march. An invincible realm expert of the Shadow Throne personally led the team. 10 experts of the half-step invincible realm, 30 experts of the thunder-shocking realm, more than 500 experts of the fire-flaming realm, and thousands of elites of the ice-condensing chi-controlling realm entered Bolton. They met on a narrow road. Early in the morning 2 days ago, the elite army of the Shadow Throne was completely annihilated. Li Dongqing of the Sword Dynasty took action in person. The invincible realm expert of the Shadow Throne was completely smashed by a stream of sword energy. The sword formation formed by dozens of experts of the half-step invincible realm of the thunder-shocking realm was directly torn apart by Li Dongqing. None of the thousands of elites survived. 2 days ago in the evening, the Sword Dynasty officially entered Germany. The 1,500 elites seemed to have completely gone mad, like wolves and tigers. The European Alliance was in chaos. Without organizing a second counterattack, the Sword Dynasty entered France. Straightforward, resolute, cruel, and iron-blooded. Just like the march route announced by the Sword Dynasty at the beginning. Thousands of kilometers away. Mountains, rivers, lakes, and seas. No pause, no hesitation. March. March. Forward with indomitable will. However, from the map, the Sword Dynasty could draw a straight line from Mormons to Fog Capital. All the obstacles were completely shattered in front of the sharpness of Emperor Dong's palace. 24 hours ago. The Sword Dynasty passed through France and officially entered Fog Capital. 20 hours ago, the two bases of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Fog Capital were completely annihilated. Sword energy flew across the sky, tearing the sky. There was no sign of the enemy. Only the vast sword energy all over the world fell from the sky. 2 swords. Only 2 swords. 2 bases of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital in different directions suddenly exploded. At the same time, the will of the Shadow Throne and the powerful families swept across the entire European continent. The Shadow Throne transferred more than 100,000 elites from all directions to form a joint army to enter Fog Capital. All kinds of armaments were continuously supported. The 2 invincible realm experts of the Shadow Throne, and all the experts of the Thunder-Shocking Realm and the Fire-Flaming Realm set out at the same time. The 100,000 joint army, the experts of all realms and elites, like a mountain, suddenly pressed against the 1,500 elites of the Sword Dynasty. 14 hours ago. The 1,500 elites of the Sword Dynasty were almost completely annihilated. Only less than a dozen seriously injured people were missing. More than half of the famous high-level officials of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital died in the battle. But the battle was not over. It was even more cruel. Sword light. Sword light. The sword lights that filled the space between heaven and earth were like rainbows. The Sword Dynasty that buried most of the high-level officials was still the Sword Dynasty. Because the sword light was still there. The sword light shone. The endless sword energy covered the sky and the earth, mighty and mighty. Its divine power was matchless and unparalleled in the world. The crazy and sharp edge smashed the skyscrapers in the city, tore the streets, and rushed into the crowd. The Purgatory officially arrived. Li Dongsheng had no scruples. 25 years, from childhood to adulthood. Too much madness had accumulated in his heart. He wanted to see the whole world. 10 hours ago. 2 invincible realm experts of the Shadow Throne died in the battle. Nearly 60 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts died in the battle. Less than 10% of the thousands of elites of the Shadow Throne survived. More than half of the 100,000 joint army was lost. In the purgatory of the world, there were mountains of corpses. Li Dongqing's expression was extremely calm from beginning to end. His physical strength was still abundant, and the sword light was still dazzling. The whole city, the whole European continent, and the whole world were trembling under the sword light. This was the era of Emperor Huawu. But it was on the verge of collapse because of the madness of another person. Countless high-tech weapons roared down from the sky, exploded, and the fire soared into the sky. The huge impact completely destroyed the structure of the city. Li Dongqing was moving forward. Artillery fire, the crowd, the army, the so-called elites, a messy battlefield, anything in front of him was completely torn apart under the sword light. It had no effect. It had no effect on stopping him. He was bare-handed. He had no sword in his hand, but the sword energy soared into the sky. He didn't have any worries, nor did he have any worries. His birth itself was a mistake, a tragedy. In that case, what was there to worry about? No force could fight against the whole world. But he, Li Dongqing, could. An hour ago. The headquarters of the Shadow Throne exploded under the sword light. The joint army of less than 10,000 people completely collapsed and began to flee. Li Dongqing did not chase after them. He entered the city from one direction of Fog Capital and slowly walked in another direction. His footsteps were neither fast nor slow. In the scene of purgatory, the young man, who was only 25 years old this year, looked calm and indifferent. His clothes were as white as snow. He passed by collapsed blocks one after another. He walked through one street after another. An ancient and magnificent castle appeared in his line of sight. It used to be the center of the whole European continent, and it was still a big shadow over the European alliance. They were as rich as a country, and they were strong and valiant. Grand Duke Rothschild's castle. Li Dongqing continued to move forward. In front of the castle, there was a dense crowd of figures. Li Dongqing could not see their faces. Because everyone was kneeling in front of the castle, with their heads pressed tightly to the ground. Li Dongqing narrowed his eyes. A voice that was once high and mighty sounded in his ears. The entire Rothschild family pays respect to His Majesty the God of Sword. Chapter 1280. In mid-April. After the end of the third meeting of the European Alliance, the Alliance officially made an announcement. 16 countries, including England, France, Germany, Bolton, Highland, and Italos, cancelled Li Dongqing's wanted order. Emperor Dong's palace had become a thing of the past. The sword garret had disappeared. The sword dynasty officially ruled the European continent. There was no foreshadowing, no detour, and no leeway. The sword dynasty marched into the European continent. The sword dynasty attacked. The sword dynasty destroyed the Shadow Throne. The sword dynasty destroyed the Joint Legion. The sword dynasty stayed in England. Silence, calmness, uproar, and panic. The European Alliance held 3 meetings in a week and finally cancelled Li Dongqing's identity as a wanted criminal in the silence of the whole world. There was no way out. The European Union jumped down from the sky and was utterly humiliated. From beginning to end, Li Dongqing didn't say anything. He didn't need to talk. He just needed to kill. The European Alliance had sent 5 special envoys in the past week, and England was particularly anxious. Under the circumstances of heavy losses, they had already pinched their noses and admitted the fact that they had suffered heavy losses. They had lost face, and they wanted to regain some of it. The combat power that Li Dongqing had shown in Fog City had completely shaken the entire dark world. The outside world generally believed that Li Dongqing's strength was infinitely close to the Emperor of Huawu. If they could get in touch with such a person first, whether it was asking for a way out or some in-depth cooperation or support plan, as long as Li Dongqing was willing to agree, they could talk. They wanted to talk. But Li Dongqing didn't want to. All 5 special envoys died on the way to see Li Dongqing, which completely showed Li Dongqing's attitude. Many countries in the European continent were silent. But there were also stubborn people. For example, the Kingdom of Bolton. After the death of the 5th special envoy was sent back to the Alliance, the old king of the Kingdom of Bolton was furious. He couldn't find Li Dongqing, but he called the Sword Dynasty immediately, warning them to follow the rules of the European continent and warning Li Dongqing not to go too far. Warning. That night, the old king of the Kingdom of Bolton mysteriously disappeared. Not death. But inexplicably, he disappeared. Nearly 100 elite imperial guards of the Kingdom of Bolton disappeared with the king. The whole European continent was completely silent. In the extremely cold attitude of the Sword Dynasty, everyone could feel the extreme cruelty and madness behind Li Dongqing's calmness. The madman didn't care about anything. He didn't care about the so-called benefits, status, power, wealth, or the future of the Sword Dynasty. When I am invincible, those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will perish. After I die, I don't care about the flood. He didn't care about anything, which meant that if they couldn't be sure that they could kill him, any threats or negotiations would be meaningless. The European Union didn't try to reason with the madman. The European continent completely cancelled Li Dongqing's wanted order. This was the most direct compromise they could make when they had no way out of this embarrassing situation. Their attitude was also very clear. Since they could not do anything to Li Dongqing, even if they lost face, they did not want to court death. Sword Dynasty. This new name and the framework of Emperor Dong's palace after Nirvana instantly attracted the attention of the whole world. Everyone was waiting for the Sword Dynasty's next move and the reaction of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Standing at the heart of the struggle, the Sword Dynasty started to expand at an unreasonable speed. Li Dongqing's name shone in the dark world. The sword light traveled all over the European continent. At the end of May, the power of the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the European continent was completely wiped out. The European continent was bleeding every day. The Purgatory of Heaven capital was also bleeding. 12 bases of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Dongqing met a lot of people. Some were loyal to the Purgatory of Heaven capital, some were old people who had joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital from Emperor Dong's palace for the sake of the Li family, some were opportunists with big plans, some were naive, and some claimed to be the spy of the Sword Garret in the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Li Dongqing could see their minds and knew that there might be some of his own people here. But he didn't care. Under the monstrous sword light, the 12 bases exploded one by one. His own people, loyal, opportunists, and the old people of the Li family, go to hell. Blood stained the land one after another. Wherever Li Dongqing's sword light passed, there were no holy spirits or whole corpses. The name of the sword god resounded all over the world. This was the name given to Li Dongqing by the whole Rothschild family when they begged for mercy. With the accumulation of names, it was like a certain crown, completely worn on Li Dongqing's head. The sword light, like the eternal night of blood, was boiling wantonly in the European continent. It also made the Li family and the Purgatory of Heaven capital see Li Dongqing and the Sword Dynasty clearly. This new power that was sweeping the European continent was the nirvana of Emperor Dong's palace. But this time, there was no entanglement between the Sword Dynasty and the Li family. There was no affection, no past, only blood for blood, a tooth for a tooth, only blood for blood, blood for blood, and death. There was no fluke. The anger of the Li family, the panic in the hearts of countless old people who had been loyal to Emperor Dong's palace and then joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital, because fear and survival pressure made the Purgatory of Heaven capital more united and cohesive, it didn't matter. Li Dongqing didn't care. Just kill them all. At the beginning of June, the Sword Dynasty expanded to the northern part of the European continent. In the past decade, the territory and interests of the Sword Garret that had been swallowed by the Purgatory of Heaven capital returned to the Sword Dynasty. The Sword God attacked in the northern part of the European continent. Just one sword strike. The 6th place on the World Divine List, an expert at the peak of the Invincible Realm, the leader of the Dark Knights, Dark Knight, was seriously injured. The Dark Knights merged into the Sword Dynasty and formed the Dark Legion. The leader of the Dark Knights, Dark Knight, served as the commander of the Dark Legion, codenamed Xiao Tian. A good dog. The new bases of the Sword Dynasty began to appear blatantly in all parts of the European continent. From 1 to 2, to 3, to 4. The headquarters of the Sword Dynasty moved again to Italos. The Sword Dynasty officially occupied the former Holy Land. The former Holy Emperor Palace was renamed the Sword God Region. The place where he first killed people when he entered the secular world became the first base of the dynasty in the European continent. The second base was in England. The Sword Dynasty occupied the ancient castle of the Grand Duke of Rothschild and began to improve the surrounding facilities with the castle as the center. To everyone's surprise, the location of the third base was chosen. The third base of the Sword Dynasty was actually built in the Kingdom of Bolton. The old king of the Kingdom of Bolton was still missing. And the new king gave the greatest degree of cooperation to all the requirements of the Sword Dynasty. The other countries of the European alliance realized this and started to curse the missing old fox of the Kingdom of Bolton. The old king, who didn't have much time left, exchanged his life for the chance for the royal family of Bolton to cling to the Sword God when the Sword Dynasty rose. He was resolute and decisive, like a gambler who had put all his chips on the line. The fourth base of the Sword Dynasty was the headquarters of the Dark Knights, which had become the base of the Dark Legion. Since the structure of the Dark Legion was perfect, the will of the Sword God was unimpeded in the northern part of the European continent. The storm of the rise of the Sword Dynasty swept across the entire European continent with extreme sharpness. The situation was changing all the time. Rothschild, the Holy Land, the Dark Knights, the Shadow Throne, the four forces that used to hover over the dark world of the European continent were completely gone with the rise of the sword god. The tide of the new era was howling. That year, Emperor Huawu occupied the subcontinent. He was still at the peak of his power and was even on the rise. But in a daze, everyone seemed to feel that the era that belonged to Emperor Huawu was changing. However, the rolling general trend was rapidly fading away from the original glory at a speed that no one had expected. The shadow of the heavenly Emperor Huawu in the dark world had begun to fade rapidly when he was still at his peak. The age of the sword god it had already ushered in Xianxia. Dawn was about to break. Italian Los. Sword god domain. The Sword Dynasty held their second meeting since its establishment. The meeting was convened in the name of Li Dongcheng. In reality, the ones in charge of this meeting were Dongcheng and the Shura. Li Dongcheng seemed to be tired. He had returned to the place where the Saint Emperor had died. Every day, he would spend most of his time quietly sitting there in a daze. Aside from the occasional conversation with Dongcheng during meals, he would spend most of his time by himself, not saying a single word. It wasn't until the higher-ups of the Sword Dynasty arrived at the Sword God region and entered the conference room with a large number of angel sculptures that Li Dongqing found out about the existence of this conference. Only then did Dongqing drag him into the conference room. He was still sitting in the main seat, quietly, not saying a word. The number of higher-ups of the Sword Dynasty had been reduced by more than half compared to the gathering in Mormons. The conference room was empty. However, everyone's faces were filled with an almost unconcealable fanaticism. Especially the old people who had existed during the peak of Emperor Dong's palace. In these 2 months, they really felt as if the world had been reincarnated. It was as if they had returned to more than 20 years ago, to the time when Emperor Dong's palace was invincible in the dark world. In that era, the glory of Emperor Dong shone upon the entire dark world. Now that Emperor Dong had fallen, the glory was still there. His indifference, his cruelty, his indifference, it didn't matter. This was the Sword Dynasty. He sat there. He was the Sword God, the god of the Sword Dynasty. The atmosphere in the conference room was extremely lively. Everyone was excitedly discussing the future of the Sword Dynasty. There were countless development directions, countless development plans, involving various fields, and countless data. The higher-ups who were thirsty from talking would glance at Li Dongqing, then continue to speak excitedly. From the beginning to the end, Li Dongqing only said one sentence. He appointed Dongqing as the chief administrative officer of the Sword Dynasty, responsible for all matters of the Sword Dynasty. He appointed Shura as the chief of staff of the Sword Dynasty, responsible for all the fighting forces of the Sword Dynasty. Then, there was silence. He would take revenge, but it had nothing to do with the Sword Dynasty. Therefore, when the higher-ups of the Sword Dynasty were discussing this matter, he felt that it had nothing to do with him. Do whatever you want, as long as you are happy. He sat on his seat and looked at the angel with its wings spread out in front of him, lost in thought. Then, the topic of the higher-ups' discussion suddenly shifted to him. Actually, if your Majesty had accepted Rothschild's allegiance, we wouldn't have to go through so much trouble today. The Rothschild family will become our puppet, and their assets will be transferred to Dynasty's name. This way, our strength will increase by leaps and bounds, unlike now. The Rothschild family's assets are right there. Although no one dares to snatch them from us, it's not easy to swallow them bit by bit and digest them. The old man who spoke sighed. He hesitated and smiled bitterly. Your Majesty, if you encounter something like this next time, I hope your Majesty will think twice. Li Dongqing's eyes moved, and his gaze fell on the person who spoke. He asked, "Are you teaching me how to do things?" The old man suddenly felt a chill and avoided Li Dongqing's gaze. Rothschild's fate was extremely tragic. Led by Paul, an expert at the peak of the invincible realm, the entire Rothschild family had knelt in front of Li Dongqing when the fog capital fell. They put down all their modesty and dignity, as well as all their arrogance and glory. But none of this was forgiven by Li Dongqing. Paul, the patriarch of Rothschild, had his limbs cut off. His head was cut off and hung in front of Rothschild's castle. None of the Rothschild family was spared. He did not accept any form of surrender or pleading. He did not like Rothschild. If he did not like them, he would just kill them. As for the benefits? Hee. There will be no next time. Li Dongqing said indifferently, I don't want anyone to question my decision. The people I want to kill, no matter what the reason is, they must die if I want them to die. They may have value, but it doesn't matter. If any of you think it's a pity, you can say it. I don't mind sending you down to find them. Do you understand? There was dead silence in the conference room. Everyone lowered their heads and did not say a word. Don't be so agitated. Dongqing chuckled, that's not what old Shui meant. He just wanted to quickly take over Rothschild's profits. Looking at it from another perspective, since they kneeled in front of you and chose to serve you, calling you your majesty, the god of swords, then temporarily sparing their lives isn't a big deal. Wait until you've squeezed out all of their value before killing them. That way, they can die a more painful death. Li Dongqing was silent for a moment. He could ignore anyone. But he could not ignore his own sister. I don't like them. He thought for a moment and continued, and when I appeared in front of them, Paul was kneeling, and he spoke English. Dongqing blinked her eyes. They grew up in Europe, so they were naturally familiar with English. No matter how nonsensical the reason was, Li Dongqing finally began to reluctantly give his own explanation. He said, I don't understand. The expressions of all the higher-ups of Sword Dynasty froze in the bright light. Li Dongqing shook his head and stood up. I'm tired. You guys have fun. He turned around and slowly walked out of the conference room. Expansion and contraction were the eternal themes of the Dark World. On the day that Sword Dynasty established its 30th base in Iceland, more than 40 envoys representing the European alliance personally arrived with a long list of gifts to congratulate them. That year, Li Dongqing was 30 years old. The European alliance officially recognized the position of Sword Dynasty and called the God of Swords the guardian of the European alliance. Sword Dynasty had the right to transfer special warfare departments and special warfare elites to join Sword Dynasty. This was an unprecedented expansion. The tentacles of Sword Dynasty were extremely ferocious and penetrated deep into the core of the European alliance. This year, the number of Sword Dynasty bases in the world had exceeded 90. They were all over Europe, Iceland, America, Africa, Australia. The Golden Age was brilliant. It was like the sun in the sky. The once brilliant light of the purgatory of Heaven capital was constantly dissipating. Wherever Sword Dynasty passed, there was no longer any sound from the purgatory of Heaven capital. 5 years. The Li family lost nearly half. The size of the purgatory of Heaven capital shrank by nearly half. Not everyone was not afraid of death. Even the elites and core of the Li family had also begged for mercy and surrendered before they died. Some of them were loyal to the purgatory of Heaven capital, and some were even friends of Li Dongqing's father. But all of this was meaningless in front of Li Dongqing. He did not accept any form of surrender, nor did he care about loyalty. Anyone from the purgatory of Heaven capital and the Li family, as long as they appeared in front of him, would always end up the same way. They would die without a whole body. Emperor Huawu was still looking down at the subcontinent, with high majesty. But everyone knew very well that he was watching himself lose everything, little by little. He lost what he had been desperately guarding for most of his life. The European continent began to do its best to support Sword Dynasty, including England. Massive resources were sent to Sword Dynasty almost every day. God of Swords. Guardian of Europe. This title had a real meaning. In this name, Sword Dynasty could legitimately draw the freshest blood from the European countries and annex all other forces. Sword Dynasty's power outside the European continent was still expanding. In the European continent, the 3 words Sword Dynasty had become the only dark power in the European continent. It was a supreme power. But in a decade, Sword Dynasty, and Sword God were constantly approaching Emperor Dong's palace and Emperor Dong. A large number of angel sculptures from the Holy Emperor Palace were still preserved in the Sword God region. The olive branch had been taken away. The Holy Sword, which symbolized standing and conquering, still existed. Holy Emperor Palace had been expanded and looked bigger, but it was still quiet inside, filled with a lot of women's cosmetics and perfume. The faintly discernible sword chi had been hidden under this smell for a long time. Dong Cheng, dressed in formal clothes, walked in the bright corridor of the Sword God region. Beautiful women with different styles could be seen everywhere on both sides. There was no uniform dress. Jeans, high heels, stockings, short skirts, shorts, lace dresses, women dressed in all kinds of clothes were gorgeously dressed, laughing and chatting. Dong Cheng's eyes were calm. She had already adapted to the scene in front of her. This was the world of women ruled by the Sword God. The women here had different identities and nationalities. Most of them were between 20 and 30 years old. There were Hollywood superstars, noble ladies from various aristocratic families, talented female scientists, female entrepreneurs, royal princesses, even royal concubines, international students, special agents from various countries. Whether it was a mess or a gathering of heroes, there was a rich variety of women here. Pure, enchanting, charming, wild, quiet, elegant, noble, proud, cold, what was a lot of beauties. Only after entering the Sword God region could one truly understand the power and charm of this word. In every corner of the Sword God region, beauties could be seen everywhere, and there were even groups of them that were gorgeously dressed. However, in an environment where there were no ordinary people to serve as a foil to the beauties around them, they were still able to maintain their own charm and restraint. This was a true beauty. And these, they were all women of the Sword God. Not in name. But in reality, they had been in the Sword God's bed. A few hundred, a few thousand, even more. Just how many people were there? Dong Cheng was too lazy to count. She didn't even ask for their names, let alone their origins. Every time he vented, he would throw them out. Li Dongcheng, who would throw them out after venting, would never know. In the past few years, there were more and more women in the Sword God region. Every year, there were those who were kicked out, those who were sent in, and those who were personally killed by Li Dongcheng. In any case, every time she saw them, Dongcheng felt like she was looking at a group of new pets. From a certain point of view, this could be said to be the European alliance's support for Li Dongcheng. It could also be said to be a test. The sound of high heels hitting the ground echoed in the corridor. Dongcheng pulled a young woman in a white miniskirt and asked, "Where is Dongcheng?" "His Majesty is with Princess Linnell." The young woman who was being pulled subconsciously bowed, not daring to be disrespectful at all. They naturally knew Li Dongcheng's whereabouts. "Who is Linnell?" Dongcheng frowned. "It's the little princess of the Bansi royal family. She came to visit His Majesty half a month ago, and His Majesty allowed her to stay," the young woman said carefully. She was also from a noble family in England, but in front of Dongcheng, she was like a mouse seeing a cat. Her scalp went numb. There were no guards in the Sword God region, only the Sword God and his women, and the Sword God's sister. However, Dongcheng rarely stayed here, but these people were very familiar with Dongcheng. In the past, there had been many newly favored women who used the Sword God's favor to criticize Dongcheng. Dongcheng had personally killed a few of them, but most of them were directly killed by His Majesty the Sword God. After this happened many times, no one dared to throw a tantrum at Dongcheng anymore. "Lead the way." Dongcheng frowned. The young woman bowed slightly and quickly led the way. Dongcheng followed behind, passing through one hallway after another. Finally, she heard a sobbing and pleading voice. There was obviously more than one voice. Instead, several voices were mixed together, charming and sweet. The young woman who personally led the way blushed, but didn't dare to move forward. Dongcheng walked over and knocked on the door. The room instantly quieted down. Then, Li Dongcheng said, "Scram." The sound of clothes being put on could be heard in the room. The door opened, and one by one, beautiful women with rosy cheeks walked out of the room. They neatly stood in a row in front of Dongcheng. Every one of them respectfully bowed to Dongcheng, not daring to show the slightest bit of dissatisfaction. Dongcheng couldn't be bothered to count how many people there were in this row. When one's strength reached Li Dongcheng's level, if he wanted to play, he could play forever. Even telling him to take care of his body was meaningless. She was a little annoyed, so she waved her hand and told them to leave. The sound of the window opening could be heard in the room. The sword chi formed a strong wind, blowing out all the ambiguous atmosphere in the room from the window. Dongcheng walked into the room. Li Dongcheng was already wearing a white robe embroidered with a dragon. Seeing Dongcheng come in, he poured a cup of tea for her. Dongcheng sat down and took a sip, not saying anything. "Cousin, are you angry?" Li Dongcheng asked. She didn't know when it started, but Li Dongcheng had changed the way he called her. It was a way to control himself, to remind himself. No. Dongcheng shook her head. You should know what these women and the people behind them are thinking. Of course. Li Dongcheng nodded. The European alliance's support for us is also a test. They can't find a flaw in me, so they want to create a flaw in me so that they can bind us together. They don't have to worry about me flipping the table. I don't have a child, so in their eyes, it's an opportunity. If one of those things outside is pregnant with my child, I will have a weakness. But how is that possible? It's just for fun. If cousin is unhappy, I can make them scram anytime. Actually, Dongcheng hesitated and said with difficulty, having a child, it should be good, right? I am the same as you, I don't plan to have a child. Li Dongcheng shook his head. Then Sword Dynasty, Dongcheng frowned. Why does sister care about this? Li Dongcheng smiled, it starts with me, and ends with me. Dongcheng was silent for a while, then changed the topic. It's almost the Qingming festival. I will remember. Let's go see Godfather together. Still not seeing Elder Lin? No. Someone from Jianghu is here. He wants to talk to you. His rank is not low. He is a counselor, so his words should carry some weight. He probably wants to invite you to Jianghu. It's obvious that he is on the opposite side of Li Huawu. I don't want to see him. I don't need their invitation to go to Jianghu. Who do they think they are? Li Dongcheng shook his head. Kill him. Dongcheng nodded and responded casually. She continued, the power of the purgatory of heaven capital has been eliminated. The Li family's influence has completely disappeared in the European continent, Snow Country, America, Africa, and Australia. Next, only the subcontinent is left. Li Dongxing took a sip of tea and said lightly, if that's the case, let's go to Dongdu tomorrow. Tomorrow? Dongcheng was a bit surprised. Li Dongxing nodded, it's just killing. What else do I need to prepare? He would go to Dongdu tomorrow. Dongcheng left the Sword God region and began to convey the Sword God's orders to the Sword Dynasty. Everyone was caught off guard and started to get busy. That night, a beam of sword light rose from the Sword God region. The sword energy lit up the whole Sword God region. Li Dongcheng, the Sword God, broke through again. The Sword Dynasty, a cold and chilly voice echoed in the palace of East Island. He's here in East Island. There was dead silence in the magnificent laboratory. In recent years, every time the high-level meeting of the Purgatory of Heaven capital was held, the atmosphere was so depressing. What? Are you all mute? The heavenly emperor of Huawu, who was over 50 years old, suddenly raised his voice, and his voice became sharper and sharper. The conference room was full of people. Around the conference table, there was also a circle of screens. The high-level people who were not in East Island sat on the other side of the screen, silent with their colleagues in the conference room. Actually, there's nothing to say. Beside the heavenly emperor of Huawu, Daybreak, an expert at the peak of the invincible realm who ranked 5th on the divine list, slowly said, "We have known Li Dongqing's attitude for a long time. He is a madman, and he doesn't care about his previous relationship with the Li family." The corner of Li Huawu's mouth twitched. Everyone present looked a little strange. The previous relationship with the Li family, what was there to care about? Could you care about it? Daybreak's voice continued, "He didn't intend to let us live at all. In the beginning, it was Huazhang. In the past few years, all the elites of the Li family who died in his hands were lessons from his mistakes. Everyone here knows that with the character of that madman, if we fall into his hands, what will happen to us? We, our families, our friends, everything we care about, everything we cherish will be completely destroyed by that madman. The situation has come to this point. In front of us, there are only 4 words, you or I live. So, it's meaningless to say anything else. We can only fight to the death. If we win, we live together. If we lose, we die together. Of course, we can also beg for mercy. If the sword god is in a good mood, he may let you go." Amidst the deathly silence, a voice rang out once more, "Kill. At worst, we will die. We have no way out." The atmosphere in the conference room became active. In a situation where there was no way out, everyone's attitude was surprisingly consistent. Fight to the death. The heavenly emperor of Huawu silently listened to the speeches in every corner. Suddenly, he looked up at a middle-aged man sitting opposite Daybreak. "What did Zhongzhou State say?" the heavenly emperor of Huawu suddenly asked. The middle-aged man looked solemn and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, Zhongzhou State wants to know, between you and sword god Li Dongqing, who is stronger and who is weaker, and how big the gap is." The heavenly emperor of Huawu fell silent. Everyone also fell silent and looked at the heavenly emperor of Huawu. After the rise of the Sword Dynasty, it swept all the way. The purgatory of Heaven capital had resisted. But the heavenly emperor of Huawu did not make a move from beginning to end. The current number 1 person on the divine list kept strangely silent and gave in. Who was stronger, the heavenly emperor or the sword god? Everyone was very concerned about this question. Now the Sword Dynasty had 2 experts at the peak of the invincible realm, not including Li Dongqing. One was Azura. The other was Xiao Tian. In addition to the special warfare elites transferred from various countries in the European alliance, such a force was no worse than the purgatory of Heaven capital. There was even one more expert at the peak of the invincible realm. In this way, the comparison of the strength of the leaders of the 2 sides became the key of the key. Does it make sense to ask this question? Daybreak raised his eyebrows and sneered. Is Zhongzhou State going to quit because His Majesty is no match for Li Dongqing? Don't forget, the current East Island is not the East Island decades ago. The middle-aged man representing the parliament of Zhongzhou State moved the corner of his mouth, but he remained silent. Indeed, from the standpoint of the country, Zhongzhou State also had no way out. Because the current East Island was completely different from decades ago. No one could deny that the heavenly emperor of Huawu was an absolutely powerful figure. Not only force. In terms of power, he was also the top of the top. Li Huawu. The heavenly emperor of Huawu. It was not easy for East Island to accept such an heavenly emperor. And the heavenly emperor of Huawu had been expanding his power since he came to power. Today, with the power of the dark world, the heavenly emperor of Huawu had taken back the real power from the cabinet. The cabinet had almost become a puppet of the royal family. In the past 2 decades, Zhongzhou State had sent people to East Island 3 times, each time on a larger scale. In total, nearly 9 million young people from Zhongzhou State had come to East Island. The royal family fully cooperated in this regard, giving these young people all kinds of favorable treatment and support strategies for their descendants. These 9 million young people from Zhongzhou State had formed the same number of families from Zhongzhou State, and their children were also named with the surnames of Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State's progress step by step depended on the support of the heavenly emperor of Huawu. According to the current situation, within 30 to 50 years, inside East Island, most people would be from Zhongzhou State. At that time, East Island would still look like East Island, but in fact, it would be equivalent to the special provincial administrative area of Jianghu State. They were all from Jianghu State, had the surnames of Jianghu State, learned the history of Jianghu State, and spoke Chinese. After generations of development, when the fruit of victory was harvested, it was imaginable how much benefit Jianghu State would get. And all of this was inseparable from the heavenly emperor of Huawu. Retreat? Jianghu State had no way to retreat. They couldn't give up a new, incomparably developed and prosperous province in the future, nor could they give up the people that were sent here. So no matter whether the heavenly emperor of Huawu was a match for the sword god or not, they had to help him defend this crisis. No matter what the meaning is, since you asked, I can tell you. The heavenly emperor of Huawu raised his hand and interrupted Daybreak's further development. His expression was a little complicated, and he said in a low voice, "Here, he can't do anything to me." This sentence clearly showed who was superior and who was inferior. Here, Li Dongqing couldn't do anything to him. Many people knew why that was the case. Because since the rise of the Sword Dynasty, the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to build its own weapon system, and at the same time, moved the people around the imperial palace. The entire Dongdu, the area where the imperial palace was located, had become a forbidden area for ordinary people in Dongdu. All the people living here were imperial guards. The army of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, the elites of the Li family. In just a few years, the heavenly emperor of Huawu had installed hundreds of automatic and semi-automatic weapon systems around the imperial palace. As long as the weapon system was activated, the firepower of the imperial palace could cover every inch of land in the entire urban area. At that time, no matter how many people from the Sword Dynasty came, they would die. This was a completely defensive posture, and they had built their own home into a turtle shell. With this weapon system, the heavenly emperor of Huawu thought that Li Dongqing, who was unarmed, couldn't do anything to him. The conference room became even quieter. In fact, His Highness Daybreak is completely right. Now, we have no way out. The middle-aged man representing Jianghu State stood up and said calmly, "This is a strategy, but I can guarantee that the Purgatory of Heaven capital won't fight alone this time. Jianghu State will be your strongest support." No one wanted a force like the Sword Dynasty to enter East Island and the subcontinent. This represented a huge uncontrollable risk. Because no one could control the Sword Dynasty. And no one could control Li Dongqing. The Sword Dynasty had now spread everywhere except the subcontinent. If they were allowed to occupy the subcontinent, it meant that the entire Dark World would no longer exist. Or rather, by then, the Sword Dynasty would be the Dark World. The Dark World would be the Sword Dynasty. No country could extract any benefits from the Dark World. Instead, because of the uniqueness of the Sword Dynasty, they had to promise them more things. Jianghu State would not accept such a situation. Similarly, the Wang family of Beihai, who also had a huge hatred for the sword god Li Dongqing, would not accept such a situation either. When the Sword Dynasty completely rose, they would be the most natural ally of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The Border Control Corps of Jianghu State has 50,000 elites, and the 4 Special Warfare Headquarters are already near the sea area of East Island. They can enter East Island at any time. The middle-aged man said calmly, "In addition, the Wang family of Beihai, 50,000 elites of the Beihai Corps, the Guards Corps of Mount Dibing, and the Heaven Punishment Troop of Beihai can also enter East Island as soon as possible. We also contacted Mrs. Song Ci and got confirmation. 20 experts at the peak of the Thunder-Shocking Realm, 6 of the Half-Step Invincible Realm, and Mrs. Song Ci, who is at the peak of the Invincible Realm, will all come to East Island. At the moment of life and death, since there is no way out, we might as well fight to the death. For this, Jianghu State only has one request. Kill the sword god and destroy the Lin clan. The next chapter will be the end of Li Dongqing's story. In fact, I've always wanted to write a big chapter. But after the COVID-19 vaccine, I've been sleepy and my arm hurts. I can't get enough sleep no matter how much I sleep. I feel terrible. You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.